Good. I don't think he's even dialing in tonight. All right, the hour is 7:30 has arrived. Let's call this study session of Urbana School District 116 to order. Roll call, please.
Member Hall,
Here.
Member Orr,
Here.
Member Ogalski,
Here.
Member Carter is here, Vice President Exum,
Here.
and President Pulaski.
Here, are there any additions, corrections, or modifications to tonight's agenda? All right, hearing none, I'm going to start reading our submitted citizen statements. There are 11 of them. If anybody else would like to present before the board after I read these, please fill out a goldenrod sheet in the back of the room and hand it to our recording secretary, Lori Johnson. The first one is from Michelle Nelson. Dear Urbana School District 116 School Board, I understand that you are reviewing dual language models in the district. I provide the following for public comment and your consideration. As a parent of a student in one of the first cohorts of DL at Leo, she is now in 9th grade, and as a community member and Urbana taxpayer, I see this issue as quite complex. I reviewed the slides for this meeting, 8.2 Spanish Dual Language Update BOE 5.3.22. Although the pros and cons of various DL models are presented, I do not see any data related to the actual learning outcomes of the participants who are in the program. I am hoping the 10-year review of the program will include answers to these questions. What is the efficacy of the DL program for student learning, for cultural understanding? Were English learners reaching language proficiency faster than without it? Was proficiency in math and science enhanced? Compromised? How did the native speakers in the DL program fare over this 10-year period? What do the students who were in the program think now? How are they doing, and are they taking classes in Spanish or in English or both? Are they enrolled in AP classes at the high school? How do the learning outcomes from the Urbana model of DL compare to those of other programs in Illinois or in the U.S.? Shouldn't student learning outcomes be part of a 10-year review and one of the criteria for new DL decisions? I see that several forms of feedback were provided, but I was surprised to see that there did not seem to be any opportunity for input from the non-DL teacher staff or from students who have been in the DL program. I urge you to seek out data related to student learning and to ask the district to provide student learning outcome data in the 10-year review of the program and in the decision-making process. Thank you for your consideration and service on the school board. From Michaela Kaufman, to whom it may concern, I am writing as a parent to 2 children currently enrolled at Leo School in the regular classroom programming. I would first like to address my growing concerns as classroom sizes continue to grow for regular non-dual language classrooms and the district's inability to provide their students with equitable learning opportunities. As a Mexican American who initially applied to have my children enrolled in the dual language program, it became clear to me that the lottery system being used to select non-native speaking families was based more off of family income than a fair lottery system. While I have accepted the painful reality that my children would not be offered an opportunity to learn Spanish despite having a mother who is Hispanic, I have now grown disillusioned with the idea that my children may now be ripped from their school and forced to attend a new one to accommodate the district's classist ideals. There are major concerns of equity in creating a monolingual school model, which include the potential for both dual language and non-dual language students being bussed out of their neighborhoods to attend a new school. My children and I live directly across the street from Leo, and as a single parent, it has been both a necessity and a great convenience to drop my children off by foot and be within reach of them during my workday. I am unfamiliar with the other schools in the district, but it would seem problematic and unfair for folks living at or below the poverty line to make these accommodations for the district in order to appease the concerns of those at the top. I ask that you consider keeping Leo intact and reviewing your policies for admissions to your dual language program, as I stand firm in believing that the educational experiences of families with higher socioeconomic status are valued more than those who have less. Best, Michaela Lennon. From Caitlin Clark. Hello, thank you for taking public comments. I support keeping the dual language program within the context of a school's neighborhood community. I do not support breaking up each school along grade lines to support 1 or 2 grades at one building. I support the neighborhood school model using DL as a strand model because it helps facilitate long-term community building around classmates and families, caregivers within the neighborhoods. Having students transition every year or two to a new building will create unnecessary anxiety around change. Having designated buildings for DL, even if the others use the K-6 model, is returning to the old King School model that we moved away from in the interest of having the ESL and DL programs at multiple schools. I am also concerned about managing transportation if we move to the proposed grade center model, meaning having separate grades for each school. Keeping the neighborhood model helps many families manage getting kids to school on time or having neighbors help, which is possible even if kids are in different grades. Although Urbana is relatively small, I am concerned that the added commute may be a strain on a lot of families or may add busing where it would otherwise be unneeded. It would be difficult for families with siblings in different grades as well. Keeping the neighborhood model encourages walking and biking to school where possible and more sustainable transport options. I am also a strong supporter of having more grade levels interact on the playground for social and emotional development. While COVID has already presented us challenge in this regard, I hope that will not be completely eliminated. Kids need to learn to get along with people older and younger than them before they reach adulthood, and school is a big part of that early on. I also worry about losing out on the cross-cultural interactions and opportunities for student learning in that regard. We have so much diversity thanks to the combination of neighborhood schools and incorporated DL programs. Moving to the DL building-specific model would be a return to something like the old model, with King School being the only ESL program. Although that school was wonderfully diverse, the rest of the district lost out. It was also othered in a sense because no other schools had such a program. I worry that this will happen again. I was very excited to see the dual language program expand to more schools, and I hope it stays that way. I do not support having the DL programs in their separate buildings. And that means I am not in favor of the K-6 or K-7 model. I would like the existing programs and teachers to receive more support where they are currently located using the strand model and/or to expand and hire more teachers able to support that program at additional neighborhood schools. I am concerned that a change this large right now would create greater mental health declines as students have to adjust to new district structure while we are still trying to recover from the pandemic that is still ongoing. The physical school location and the teachers at their neighborhood schools have been a bastion of stability for many of our kids. I am torn on this because I know our district has limited funds and that this proposal was designed with great intentions. And I would like to see the deal expand. Thank you for accepting public comments. Oh, sorry. And she sent a second email later. Additional comments. One, a big part of why we chose Urbana over other communities in the area was that we wanted our child to attend a neighborhood school. A, we'd seen friends deal with the stress of the Champaign system. B, community is important. We've known some of these kids' families since our child was a toddler at the neighborhood park. C, even though some of the neighborhood friends are in the DL program, our child gets to see them, walk with them to school, interact with them regularly, etc. 2, even though he's in the monolingual program, we like that he has regular exposure to dual language kids. A, this diversity is good and beneficial. B, it would be lessened at a monolingual school. 3, these kids have been through a lot of upheaval in their short elementary school careers. A, for the first graders, kindergarten, which is the transition to grade school, was on Zoom. And for second graders, their K year was interrupted by COVID. B, their first in-person year has been marked by masks and other COVID protocols, which we fully support, but were certainly disruptive, followed by the loosening of those restrictions. C, now there's a possibility they'll be split from their neighborhood friends and sent to another school. D, maybe this will become its own point number 4. On a personal note, my oldest child has anxieties and doesn't deal well with change. Despite A through C above, she formed a tight bond with educators and staff at Leal. It will be exceptionally difficult to move her to a new school in a new building with new faculty staff. E, I don't think this kind of change is warranted Given the drastic COVID-related upheaval, perhaps we slow this process down and encourage more feedback from all stakeholders. Best, Caitlin Vitowski-Clark. Just in time. From Robin Fellers. Hello, board members. We're writing to address a concern about what seems to be the goal of a select few, changing the DL program structure. From the outside, it appears the whole school model is being pursued so hard because of staffing problems. We certainly understand a need to solve staffing issues. Our family has been in the program for 2 years, and both years we have experienced recruiting and retention problems. However, we would like to see these problems handled in different ways than simply putting all the Spanish DL students in one building. Currently, our main concerns are restructuring the DL program into one school surround, 1, segregation of the Spanish-speaking community, 2, displacing students from the neighborhood schools, 3, the lack of input from families in the monolingual program who, as far as we know, were not surveyed. 4, separating families who may be in both programs in the neighborhood schools. 5, a lack of data supporting a change in program structure. We hope these issues and many more will be addressed in the coming discussions. Thank you, Robin Fellers and Ryan Fellers. Legal parents. From Zachary Putnam. Dear school board members, we would like to thank the DL Programming Committee for their efforts over the past months to address important issues in the Urbana DL program. We especially appreciate their efforts to recruit and retain the best staff for Urbana children. We support maintaining the current strand model for DL students, including our child in the Leal DL program, and their younger siblings who we also intend to enroll in the Leal DL program. Hosting the DL program in neighborhood schools provides students, both DL and English only, with positive exposure to greater diversity and attracts families to DL that might not otherwise participate. Neighborhood schools build connections in the local community and enable families to have all their children attend the same school, regardless of their DL status, helping to simplify the hectic lives of families with young children. Further, integrating DL and English-only students and families in a school normalizes Spanish as a language on the same level with English. In contrast, the whole school model, while perhaps more efficient and better for staff, may come up with significant costs to Urbana students, families in the larger Urbana community. A whole school model will isolate DL students and families, making them seem more other, not just in elementary school, but at UMS, when the DL students will know few, if any, English-only students. Switching to a whole school model will rob a community of its neighborhood school, creating a significant equity issue for a set of neighborhoods in Urbana. The primary reason our family decided to settle in Urbana as opposed to Champaign was neighborhood schools. We want our children to grow up in a tight community facilitated by neighborhood schools. Don't take that away from Urbana families. We are further disappointed with the information regarding the potential switches from the strand model posted by the DL committee to be presented at the May 3rd school board meeting. There was no discussion of education or pedagogy impacts on students potentially impacted by the change. The education of Urbana's children should be the first consideration of the committee. Students, DL and English only parents at Williams and Leal were not included on the committee. Neglecting these important stakeholders, the committee was over 80% staff, may produce results that are skewed and inequitable. From Amy Cohen, excuse me. Dear members of the board, thank you for providing the forum to give feedback on the process of restructuring the DL program. I would like to specifically provide feedback on the option of creating a whole school DL model. As a parent of a monolingual learner at Leal Elementary, I was surprised to learn that our elementary school was under consideration for losing that distinction. Indeed, the reasons why we moved to Urbana were 1, for the DL program, and 2, the opportunity to have a neighborhood school and the sense of community that is inherent in that. That's ultimately the reason why many families chose Urbana over Champaign. Certainly, we're not here for the tax breaks. That is a joke. We chose it for the inclusion of being an active voice where we live, work, and learn. While we were not accepted for the DL program, we have loved being at Leal and the sense of community and diversity that comes with being embedded with the DL program. I was shocked to learn that after years of continual changes, many of which were understandably out of the district's hands, that a new one is being introduced. Most concerning to me was that for a change that would impact the entire community, only the parents affiliated with DL were identified and surveyed as stakeholders in this process. See slide 9, shared by the board. Most parents in monolingual classrooms were not even aware of what is up for discussion, as until this point we have been actively left out of it. For decisions that involve trickle-down effects for every learner in a particular school, every family deserves a voice in the process. For our students' mental health, when they have ultimately contended with more generational adversity than their parents ever had to, including another change into what should feel like a constant, is alarming. Even more so in the absence of compelling data that supports these decisions and program goals, I am definitely opposed to redistricting Urbana schools and moving away from the neighborhood school model that is a strength in our community. From Emily Edwards, dear administrators and community members, thank you for your efforts supporting the DL program in Urbana School District. Our strong preference is for the program to remain intact as it currently is as a strand in both elementary schools. We would appreciate more information as to how the proposed modification to combine into a single school would help with issues presented, such as teacher retention. Many parents have expressed confusion on this process and serious concerns about the detrimental effects of combining into a single DL program held at only one of the elementary schools. We would appreciate more transparency on this decision-making process. Thank you. From Ruth Kantorovitz, dear members of the board, as the board may remember, the previous updates on the Spanish dual language program did not contain a single data showing that the program improved the academic outcome of the English learners in it. Indeed, it would be hard to believe that the 90-10 model of the DL program, which immerses the English-speaking kids in Spanish for the first few years, while depriving the Spanish-speaking students from learning English through immersion, can be beneficial for the English learners. By law, school districts must monitor the process of all English learners to ensure they achieve English language proficiency and acquire content knowledge within a reasonable period of time. Surely, if the outcome was successful, the administration would have proudly presented it. Unfortunately, data from the Illinois report card indicates otherwise. The English learners are doing worse academically under the Spanish DL program, as I discussed in earlier letters to the board. Moreover, black students in the schools where DL program is housed are doing worse on average. Recently, however, the district updated its information on the DL program, stating that 1, dual language students of all racial, ethnic, and linguistic backgrounds on average are on par or outperforming district averages of students in English-only classrooms. 2, while we do see varying levels of oral language fluency in both languages based on the student's native language, we are not seeing substantial achievement in differences, gaps across racial, ethnic, and linguistic groups of students. As the district neglected to release the data which these statements are based upon, it is not clear what these statements mean and why they conflict with the state's data. For example, in 2019, the state data shockingly showed that 0% of the 5th grade English language learners at Leal and Dr. Williams were proficient in math. And of Dr. Williams' 5th graders, 0% of the Hispanic English learners were proficient in ELA. As for other racial minorities in the DL program, at Dr. Williams, less than 5% of the black students were proficient in ELA and math. Although the data on how many black students in Dr. Williams are in the DL program is not available to us, these numbers are certainly not a reason for celebration. The statement about the students in the DL program being on par or outperforming district averages of students in English-only classrooms is misleading. At the elementary school level, all the Hispanic EL students are channeled into the DL program, and hence they are hardly any students to compare them to within the district. The black students at Leal and Dr. Williams are doing an average just as badly as black students in the English-only schools. As for the statement about not seeing substantial achievement gaps across racial, ethnic, and linguistic groups of students, this statement is plainly false. At Leal, there is over a 40 percentage point difference between the performance of white students and Hispanic students in both math and ELA. Only at Dr. Williams that there is no significant difference between white and Hispanic students. Both groups hit bottom. What one might conclude here is that the dual language program is a great enrichment program for a selected group of native English speakers, which exploits the English learners using resources that were intended to help the English learners in becoming proficient in English. Sincerely, Ruth Kantorovitz. The next is from LaShawn Rimsur. My reason on why we should have an SRO at the school is because they are really helpful. Around the school, for example, my SRO officer, Burnett, he is very helpful around Urbana High School and to the children, especially to me. I was going through something and I needed his help, and he was down to help me with whatever it was. Officer Burnett is not only our SRO, he is also our protector, he is also our friend, and he also makes all of us feel comfortable coming to school. That is why I think Officer Burnett should be at Urbana High School. From Ixis Nance, dear Isis Nance, excuse me, thank you. Dear board members, my name is Isis Nance, and I am a 15-year-old freshman at Urbana High School. I am writing today in support of retaining our school resource officer. This school year, I have reached out to Officer Burnett many times. He has helped maintain a good attitude, stay out of trouble, and stay in most of my classes. I have had conversations with him when I have questions about things having to do with the law. He is keeping the school safe, like when we had the incident outside when we thought someone had a gun. He calmed us down and made us feel like it was okay and everything would be okay. He is there when you need someone to giggle with, but it is hard to say specifically what he has done because it is so much. When a student ran into my dad's car on his bike and fell, Officer Burnett was right there and helped both the student and my dad. My dad was super scared and freaked out, but SRO Burnett calmed him down and made sure everyone was safe and okay. If SRO Burnett is gone, we don't have someone to talk to that won't tell our business. He is trusted by students and staff. We need him in our building. And the last one is from Shauna Doggett. I have had the pleasure of welcoming SRO Chad Burnett into my classroom for the past 3 years. Whether in person or remote, Officer Chad has always made it a priority to come talk to students in my business and personal law class. Students submit questions, and to the best of his ability, Officer Chad answers each one with honesty and humility. Students get an opportunity to spend time with a law enforcement officer in a calm, low-stress environment and typically open up with meaningful questions. Officer Chad responds with honest answers that let students get to know the person beyond the badge and uniform. On a daily basis, Officer Chad helps people in the parking lot with car trouble, welcomes students into the building, can often be found talking with students in the halls between classes. His presence in this building is vital, creating positive relationships between students and law enforcement officers in our community. That's all. Oh, there's one more? Oh, there's one you got in just at 7, which is our cutoff. So, from Dennis Shoemaker. Hello, I reviewed the slides for tonight's study session. I can understand how logistical administrative details of the dual language program make up the majority of the focus, but I want to join the many parents who are encouraging the district to make sure that the current programs are being evaluated and improved as much as possible. Please be sure that resources and effort are spent in improving the experience of all students, regardless of how the dual language classes are distributed. That means support for teachers, engagement with families, persistent communication, and clear sets of goals for the program. Daniel Shoemaker. Okay. That is the last of our submitted comments. We have a number of people who wish to address the board in person. If anybody else wishes to address the board and has not yet done so, please fill out a form and hand it to Lori Johnson. The first up is Jenna Finch. You'll have to touch the button on the front to turn on the mic. Oh, John will get it for you.
Single buttons I can manage. So this has been interesting for me because I'm a Spanish teacher at Urbana High School, and the dual language program has impacted the high school, and we've had many discussions about it, so it's interesting to hear all the different points of view and what's happening. Had I had time to read what the board sends out, I would certainly have done so, but it has been a challenge to even keep up. So it's only the second time in my life I've spoken in front of the board. I am not a good public speaker. I tend to get, as you can hear from my voice, I tend to get stage fright. But I wanted to speak in favor of the SRO. So let me tell you where I am located in the high school, those of you who are familiar with it. You walk in the front door and there's a very long hall off to your right, and it dead ends into a classroom. That is my classroom. It is outside. It is beside an exit door. It is beside stairs that go all the way upstairs. It is beside both a men's and a women's bathroom. It is beside the commons, and it is a very, very tough location. I am inundated with students who are loud. I've had chewing gum put in my lock. Trash cans outside the door blocking me. I don't see them, so I walk into them on a regular basis. And the person who is right beside me in the defunct foreign language lab is the officer. And he is consistently a positive, warm, welcoming influence. He is one of the few people in the building who gets there before I do. He is kind. And I'd like to just tell you about 2 brief encounters with him and with students. I teach a very quiet, small class, 4th period. It's level 4 Spanish, the pre-AP. And they are always looking at the door in wonderment at the incredibly loud hall. And one day, the noise was so excessive that I went out, and there were 3 young women dancing to incredibly loud rap music on their phone and singing along and chanting with it. And I said, I'm trying to teach. Can you please take it elsewhere? So one of them said no. And I said, well, it's very hard for me to teach, and there's a camera, and you're on camera, and I really don't like to be put in the position of reporting you, but I will. So one of the girls looked at me and said, go ahead. At which point, just by coincidence, Officer Burnett was approaching from the Commons Hall, and he said, turn it down. Turned down. I mean, it was instantaneous. They had no response to me whatsoever. All he had to do was say it. And then he said, thank you to them. And they nodded. And he said, where are you supposed to be? Which I had also asked. And they kind of looked at one another and then sort of bashfully went upstairs. And he said, have a good day. And one of them just turned around and beamed at him. And I was so impressed. I just thought, this is remarkable. This is really cool. The other encounter was one where I have a student who is, she has been a challenge to the whole school. Everybody knows the child's name. And I was just stunned that I just simply could not solve any of the problems. I've been a teacher for a very long time, and I just couldn't make contact with her, couldn't get through. And I said something to Officer Burnett about her, and he said, don't feel badly. We had a meeting just about her this morning. It's not just you. He's supportive not only of students, but of teachers. And really, I would have to say teachers are not the most supported people in that building. It's sometimes I forget that we were once called a teaching and learning community. Officer Burnett is wonderful. Please don't let him go.
Thank you, Ms. Fitch. Next up is Timothy Andrew Manning.
This will be very dry compared to that. Good evening. My name is Andrew Manning, and I'm the father of a kindergartner at Lille in the dual language program. My daughter has thrived in this program. Not only is she learning Spanish very quickly and showing her confidence and enthusiasm by speaking it at home at a young age, which I hear is abnormal, but she's trying to teach me songs in Spanish, and it's been critical, surprisingly, in her learning to read English. The consistency of the words, I think, is helping her learn. Based on the information we've received thus far, my wife and I would like to see the dual language program continue in the separate schools as it is. We and a number of other parents we've spoken to at Leal do not feel we have enough information to support such a drastic change to this amazing program, and what we think we do understand leads us to oppose the changes. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The last sheet we have is for Sarah Jansen.
Sure. So I appreciate the efforts of the committee that prepared the slides for today's discussion. I want to open with just saying I know these are really challenging issues, and so I thank the committee for spending a lot of time to analyze the pros and cons of the various alternatives being considered. I think it would be immensely helpful for the community to have a clearer sense of the objectives of these major changes. Like, what are we trying to achieve here? So question one would be like, are we trying to maximize learning outcomes for native Spanish speakers? That would be a lofty objective. Or are we trying to maximize learning outcomes for all students? Are we paying attention to equity issues? Are we trying instead to just minimize the program costs of distance learning? I actually have no idea what we're trying to do here. Another thing that came out in the slides is that it seems like we might be trying to maximize teacher recruitment and retention in the Spanish programs. I think we should also be considering the English-speaking teachers. Again, it's a very challenging issue. But my point is that the report really seems to emphasize those short-run logistics questions. And I wonder if it's overlooking important learning outcomes and really important community outcomes as well. So that's my main question. What are the objectives? Point number 2 is that the report really lacks important data. Depending on our objectives, there's different data points that would be immensely helpful to have. So for one, if we're trying to cut costs, I'm an economist, it seems like a budget projection would be essential for making an informed decision. And I didn't see anything about a budget in the slides. I have no idea if we're saving money in these major decisions. And if we are, it certainly isn't clear to me without seeing any numbers that those cost savings are large. If we're trying to accommodate the needs and interests of families in the school district, then it seems like survey data would be absolutely essential and informative. I understand that survey data exists, but it has not been shared publicly. So it's very difficult as a community member and a parent to understand these decisions that are going to affect me in immense ways, potentially, when what's being proposed seems very different from the opinions that I've heard of people in the community. So I'd really love to see the survey data and have a conversation about what the survey data shows, especially disaggregated by different communities, because every community's voice here should matter. And then if the goal is to accommodate program growth, which also seems to be an important thing in the slides, then what are the enrollment trends? The report shows some numbers, but they're impossible to contextualize. Will the trends be the same if the program looks different? I've heard many friends say they will not continue in the dual language program if it moves to a different neighborhood. So that certainly has implications for projections of costs. And I'd like to see those projections and how it affects the budget. Last, obviously, learning outcomes. Data on learning outcomes, as other people have pointed out, is entirely missing from that report, and I'd love to see it. So 2 points. What are the objectives? Where's the data? I think it would be a big mistake to make a decision on something that impacts so many people in such big ways without publicly sharing that data and having a more informed dialogue. Data would inform enrollment projections and have implications for the school budget. The costs and disruptions to individual families also, I hope, will not be overlooked. The cost to families who have to commute to a school outside their neighborhood would be enormous. It's one thing to opt into or out of a program at your local school. It's an entirely different thing to be required to bus to schools elsewhere, and it has major equity implications. On a personal note, I'll be very disappointed if we lose our neighborhood school. As a parent of a monolingual scholar at Lille, I am disappointed that we have not been included in the conversation up to this point. The slides indicate that the committee only included dual language families. This is our school, this is our neighborhood, and the decision will affect my own children for the next decade, let alone children, other children elsewhere. So I sincerely hope you do not make the decision lightly. Thanks.
Thank you very much. We had another submission from Allison O'Dwyer.
Good evening, board. My name is Allison O'Dwyer. I've spoken to you before. I think this is on. I spoke to you back in 2019 several times in regards to the the school resource officer program here in Urbana. At that time, you had 2 quarter-time officers. One was located at the middle school and one was located at the high school. I also served as a biology teacher at the high school for 2 years. I interacted with our SRO at that school at that time during those 2 years. I am now a parent to a Lille first grader and an incoming Lille kindergartner. I am speaking to you tonight about 2 issues. One is the continuation of the SRO program, and the other issue is on the formation of the dual language committee and also in the administration's role in that committee. So my first thing is that in 2019, I put forth to the board a rubric from the Department of Justice on the evaluation of a school resource officer. I printed that out. I brought you all copies. I tried to make it as plain as I could, coming to you as an educator, that the evaluation of a school resource officer was something that was immensely important to me. I have looked through the data that is being presented tonight. I have followed social media from the school over the last 2.5 years since I was here, and I'm dismayed to see that many of the survey-taking tools used by administration continue to be on accepting anecdotal evidence on the school resource officers. For instance, having lunch with the superintendent of the school district to share out your opinion on a police officer in your school is not a valid form of survey data collection. That is not an anonymous way of giving feedback, and it's quite frightening for a student to walk into a room who might have an issue with a police officer who is fully armed in their school district and be able to voice that to a superintendent. Number 2 would be, I still have yet to see any evaluation of the effectiveness of that resource officer. You have the tools available to you as a school district to be able to effectively evaluate. If your desire is to continue to employ 2 full-time police officers, pay for their insurance, their squad cars, even with nice Urbana decals on those squad cars, it is extremely important that you are equating the need for another almost $400,000 for those police officers. Lastly, I know that some people in the schools may feel more comfortable with a police officer in the school, and it's important that those people's voices are heard. But the larger issue is on your survey collection and making sure that you're actually hearing all the voices and not just those who are brave enough or able enough to speak to you about it. My second issue is on the dual language program. I volunteered to be on the dual language committee. I was denied admission to that committee. Many parents were also denied admission to that committee. Many of your choices tonight are going to be made based on that committee's feedback. I want to know who selected who was on that committee, how those people were chosen, were our names anonymized when those choices were made, And how are you selecting your committee members at large? I watched your board meeting on the equity committee. I have seen that administration wants you to follow the guidance of a committee, or else you devalue committee work. Who is selecting your committee? If the administration is selecting the committees and the administration has an agenda, they will select people who will fit that agenda on that committee. I am very disheartened to know that many parents who wanted to volunteer for this committee were not given the option. I have a great voice that has a lot of different impacts. I would have loved to learn and be a loud voice for this district on why a whole strand or a whole school model would be best for our students. If I had been allowed to participate and volunteer in that committee, I could have been a voice for you to explain to parents on why this is the best option. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. O'Dwyer. Another submission, Eldris Melinda Carr.
Good evening. Hard to speak in these muzzled masks. Can you hear me okay? Good evening. Board of Education, Superintendent. I'm Eldris Melinda Carr, and I am the co-chair of the Education Committee for the Ministerial Alliance of Champaign-Urbana and Vicinity. It's been a while since I've been here, reconnecting, and thanking the superintendent for reaching out to us recently about the SRO program. And we had submitted a letter back in 2019, if you remember, regarding a form. So I'm just coming to ask what that form, what the status is, or would it be something that parents would be able to use? I haven't had to really look at the agreement in detail, comparing with the last one. And I understand some things may have been changed as it relates to the parent being notified of situations where their child may be called in for questioning or interviewing related to an incident. I know if there's a serious incident or an emergency, of course, which we've had some things, unfortunately, in our community, gun violence, and that would be an emergency where SRO or our law enforcement would have to come in and take the situation. So I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about situations where a student may be called in for an incident and the parent may not be notified. And these situations have occurred. So I'm saying this form, it relates more to SRO, but there is an opportunity to revise it to include if official at a school who deals with discipline and there's a need to call in a student for an incident, that the parent is also notified, so that the student, if they're questioned or if they may have been a witness for a situation. And I'm speaking of experience because it's happened in other places, and some other places are using a similar form for their child in the school. So I'm not speaking I'm speaking from things that are happening, not just in our area and all over. So I'm just saying, for protection of the rights of the students and their parents in notification. And this has happened at the state level. So, and I'm just, for example, under the Rauner's administration, Governor Rauner, there was a bill that was going to be passed that the parent must have been given 24 to 48 hours. Now that was watered down later. So these things have been happening if it's happened at the state level. So it has not disappeared. So I'm just speaking for, that's our role, is to look at protecting the rights of the students. And we know there needs to be balance in the process. So I just wanted to say, could you respond to the form and where that might fit? Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Carr. There's one more. If anybody else wishes to address the board, please fill out a form and hand it to Lori Johnson. Next up is, Amy Cotton.
Hi, it's Amy Cohen. Thank you so
Cohen,
much.
sorry.
You're fine, you're good. I was scribbling it down to make it in time. Paul, you read a letter from me already as the parent of a Leal first grader, so I'll just emphasize again, you did a lovely job reading it, but the point I will emphasize to everybody, we came here, we came to Urbana because of the DL program. Didn't get into it, that's fine. You're not guaranteed a spot in it. But now to hear that we're part of a process that might take away the opportunity to have a neighborhood school is really, really disheartening. And to not have a voice in that process, to feel like these decisions were made behind closed doors when I know that the board is really trying to make decisions transparent to build trust with parents. This just felt like a real blow. And in particular because I don't think parents of kids in the monolingual classrooms even know what's at stake here. I don't think that they're aware that there's a chance that our kids will be bused to another school as a result of these changes. And in the absence of that data, in the absence of support, and losing the diversity of our school, which is such a strength to have the DL program embedded there, takes away the whole charm of that school and the whole educational rigor that it held for us. So I'm going to read a letter that my husband wrote, who could not be here because children, but I'll share it with you all. Dear district leadership, I'm emailing in regard to the recent announcement of Urbana School District's potential plans to redistrict their elementary school system. Like many families, what attracted us to move to Urbana as opposed to Champaign was the opportunity for our children to bike and walk to school and attend a place with friends they had from the neighborhood. Further, while we were so disappointed that our application wasn't selected for the DL program, we appreciated being in the same school as kids attending this program through the addition of the diversity in the school environment. Although I understand funding reasons prevent otherwise interested families from being involved in the program, I would think Urbana School District could still value the indirect effects of monolingual classes being housed under the same roof as their DL program. Finally, what is most troubling to me is the timing of these plans. From virtual kindergarten to a first grade filled with quarantines and masks, we know our son, like everybody else, has had their elementary school system experience negatively impacted in a meaningful way over the past 2+ years. We are keeping our fingers tightly crossed that for many students, 22-23 will be their first year having the type of school year that they were entitled to. As a clinical child psychologist, we know that school transitions are one of the best predictors of distress and impairment early in life. To think that the school is even considering introducing a school transition within this context is disappointing. I can imagine from a logistical perspective, having the DL program under one roof makes the lives easier for administrators and teachers alike. However, I hope the well-being of the students, especially those who've suffered a great deal during the COVID-19 pandemic, can be weighed as a priority in this decision-making process. I don't know any research that would suggest putting another school disruption, this time in the form of an additional school transition, on these kids' backs as an informed decision. Thank you again for providing me the opportunity to voice my perspective on this issue, and I hope school leadership sends a strong message to the community that our children's academic, social, and emotional well-being is your top priority, and that you will not follow through on any plans to disrupt our kids' development by taking them out of neighborhood schools. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Cohen. Does anybody else wish to address the board? Last call. All right, thanks. Citizen statements are completed. There is no call for an executive session after tonight's meeting. Is there a motion to approve tonight's agenda?
So moved.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Student ambassador report. Michael.
My report is rather infinitesimal tonight. I'm just wishing the best for all of us that are undergoing testing these upcoming weeks, and we're almost there at the summer, almost there. So just a reminder.
And good luck to everybody. First administrative report tonight is on the SRO program. Dr. Aubrey Tatum.
Okay, I am going to invite up Mr. Nance and Ms. Blixen. Mr. Cooper will kind of have you come on up, and Officer Burnett, so that we don't have to play musical chairs once we get started. Oh. Okay. We're gonna kind of toggle back and forth between a couple documents that are on the back table back there for the public, as well as board members. You have these electronically and hopefully paper copies in front of you. So, good evening, everybody, and we are back 2.5, 3 years later to review our SRO program and talk a little bit more about where we are in 2022. So our goals for tonight, we're going to just do a short update. We have some frequently asked questions that have come in over the years that we've included in a document. We'll talk a little bit about COVID impact. And as most people have referred to tonight, our SROs started basically at the very beginning of COVID, and this has been their first year to really even get to know staff and students, so we'll talk about that a little bit. We have some feedback from UMS UHS staff as well as UHS students, reflections from our folks who are at the table. We'll give them an opportunity to share their feedback, and we do have some data that we will be sharing. If you remember 3 years ago, the chief at that time, almost said Sros, Seraphin, came and shared 5 years worth of arrest data and community impact data related to the law enforcement SRO/detective who had been in our buildings. So we shared that data. So we're calling out our pre-program data, and then tonight we'll share some post-program data for the last 2.5 years. And then we'll also look at the changes in the SRO agreement. We made very few changes from the previous agreement. We spent a lot of time 2.5 years ago talking through all the words and wordsmithing all the language. So we did not make significant changes there, but I will highlight just 2 or 3 additions to the agreement. So what is a school resource officer? So by definition, a school resource officer is a career law enforcement officer who is by sworn authority deployed by the police department as part of a community-oriented policing initiative. Our officers are Urbana police officers, and they are technically Urbana Police Department staff that are in our building. The primary goal of our SRO program is to maintain a safe learning environment and build positive relationships with our school communities. So 2.5 years ago, we talked a lot about the role of the SRO and the triangle in terms of that mentor, teacher, and basically just the relationship piece. And I think that is what we've spent the last 7 or 8 months doing, since we have really not had 3 years time to build those relationships. We feel like those are just starting and just really developing at both schools. So why does Urbana have an SRO? So again, our goal as a district, and by having SROs, is to foster positive relationships between our young people and the police. We know that is not always something that is welcomed in our current environment, but our goal is we want our youth to have that relationship and not be afraid of police officers. We could share many, many stories of young people who approach our officers, who have questions, who seek advice. And again, we feel like we're just at the beginning of developing that piece of the puzzle there. Strengthening police and community connections, supporting safe learning environments by protecting our students and our staff from high threat situations that occur either inside our building or that happen outside in the community, and that we want to do everything that we can to keep those things that are happening in the community from entering our building. And having an SRO present does provide that prevention and that resistance for, you know, somebody who might want to come in with ill intent. Knowing that we have those officers in the building helps that high threat situation. Our SROs, we have a document, a frequently asked question document that lists quite a bit of the training. They've had significant training. So our SROs are trained specifically to work with youth and to intervene only in specific high threat situations and to do whatever they need to do to de-escalate. So I know one question we've received quite a bit is, do our SROs manage student behavior? So we talked about this a lot 2.5 years ago, and our goal is that our SROs are not there to break up fights. Yes, that is something they may respond and may be present and may just be a voice of reason or de-escalation in those times, but our goal is that they are not engaging in those incidents as they occur. We have administrators who are trained, and that is the role of our administrators and many of our staff members. We have a extensive support staff at both buildings who are trained to do that. But our SROs are there to just be an assistance or just to be there as a presence to make sure that those situations don't escalate in other ways. So our SROs collaborate with administration. They make decisions together around whether or not a student should be going to Youth Assessment Center. We've had the Youth Assessment Center here this past year, and we've talked about the role of the Youth Assessment Center in our community. It is not meant to be a punitive space. The Youth Assessment Center is a way for our young people and our families to get resources and to get help in the community for some of the trauma and some of the other things that they're dealing with. So our SROs don't work in silos in our building. They collaborate and work with administration on all the decisions. And our goal is never to arrest students and walk our young people out in handcuffs. Our goal is to defer from that whenever possible, whenever appropriate. Now, there will be times, as Eldridge Carr said, there are times when things do escalate and we have to make those really tough, difficult decisions. But we, again, that is a team decision. I'm usually consulted, and you know, all of our administrators work with our SROs to do that, to have those conversations. So our SRO, I do want to highlight a few more. So John, this is where we would want to flip to the frequently asked question document. So we have a few other frequently asked questions that I wanted to just make note of in the document. There's a question in the document about how often do administrators meet with SROs, as we were just discussing that collaboration piece. The UHS SRO meets with assistant principals daily. They meet with the UHS administrative team weekly, and they discuss students. So recently we started an anti-violence collective with Mr. Nance's leadership at the high school, and there are several students that are at a top of a tier that we are very concerned about. And so on a weekly basis, they talk about those young people. They talk about those, how those young people are managing their day in the building and how they are navigating those spaces, and how administrators and the SRO might help support those folks, those students. At UMS, those conversations are also happening weekly and whenever needed. The SROs are also part of our district threat assessment team. They are part of our district crisis team. They are part of both of the building level crisis teams. They're part of administrative cabinet. So we really look, I know they are technically Urbana police officers, but we see them as part of our administrative team, and they really do function in that way. I also wanted to address, we have received questions about, are we notifying parents? And so this is what Eldris Carr was here to talk about, and Mr. Nance and I met with Eldris Carr and other members from the Ministerial Alliance's Education Committee, and we know this is something that is a concern of theirs. And we are following the school code in that regard. At any time we are questioning a student, we take all reasonable steps that we can to make sure that we're notifying their parents and guardians. So that has been part of the agreement. That will continue to be part of the agreement. We need to incorporate, Eldris Carr's has created a form that she shared with Principal Nance. So that is something that is a high priority for us. I'm going to come back to the question about the SAL positions, and I am going to flip through I'm going to skip the data. We'll come back to that. John, there's a question on 5 that I wanted to highlight. So could USD 116 just have security guards? This is a question that has, I think maybe 1 or 2 of our board members have mentioned security personnel instead of an SRO. I know across Wright Street, that's something that they had to do this year because CPD did not have SROs available for the schools. So our stance is using security officers instead of police officers it's just not what we feel is in the best interest of our students. Our SROs are better trained, they're better qualified than security guards would be in handling high threat situations. Security guards are limited to the degree they are not allowed to even intervene when you're in the middle of a high threat situation. The security company is going to call 911, and we would still be waiting for police officers to show up to help us because they are not able to intervene in those situations. Security guards don't have a direct connection to the community. I don't know that we would get the same buy-in and positive relationship focus that we're getting right now by having our SROs really ingrained as part of our school communities. That was a question I think I've gotten a lot. How are SROs being used in other districts? So we shared this chart previously. So 2.5 years ago, this hasn't really changed much. All of the school districts around us, St. Joe, Prairie View, Ogden, Rantoul, Unity, basically any district, even elementary schools, Rantoul's elementary schools share an SRO. The change in this chart, as you'll see, is we kept the Champaign numbers there, but for this particular year of the 3-year agreement, Champaign did not have those officers. But if you scroll down, I know they have also experienced challenges this year, and I know Mr. Cooper is going to speak to that. But they are returning to their SRO model next year. They've already allocated funding for that. I think having the security guard or security force there maybe has not, and I haven't been there, so I can only speak to what I've been told and what I've heard. It hasn't gone maybe as well as they would have liked, and they are returning to their SRO model. And hopefully Champaign Police Department will be able to provide those, but we did want to include that. Best practice, we talked about this before, is 1 SRO to 1,000 students. We currently have a little more than 900 students in our middle school and almost 1,200 students in our high school. So I know a couple of the feedback comments from high school teachers said that there are days where it feels like we could have 2 SROs and they still would be busy. I'm not going to go through all the training, but if we scroll a little bit to the next question, so our SROs have extensive training. Actually, during COVID, last year, while we were doing a lot of remote learning, they were also doing remote learning and taking a lot of virtual classes and adding additional tools to their tool belt in terms of how they can help work with the students. So in order to be a SRO, not every any Urbana police officer couldn't just walk in and be our SRO. They have to have very specific juvenile training. There's a peace officer standards and training certification that they're required to have. They have to be recertified so every so many years. We've looked at the NASRO training classes that they're required to take, and both of our SROs have kept up with those. And then if you scroll down, again, I'm not going to read all of these, but there's some very extensive classes that and coursework and certifications that they're required to maintain through the National Association of School Resource Officers. I think we're going to come back to this document when we talk about data. So thanks, John. So the SRO program years in review. So I've already mentioned the program was significantly impacted by COVID. I know in our agreement we had a formal program evaluation piece as part of what we were going to do at the end of the 3 years. We did not go into that. We just didn't feel that it was fair to the program or fair to either one of our officers. I think Officer Burnett started 4 weeks before we went into shutdown mode. He was hired in February, and we shut down the district in mid-March of 2020. So that first year, I think Officer Robinson did have an opportunity to spend a little more time at UMS than our UHS SRO, but that was really a lost year for us. 2021, well, there was very limited interaction with students, hardly any interactions with staff. A large majority of our staff worked from home for most of the year. So while students were remote learning, teachers were teaching from home. Our SROs were doing things like home visits and going out to homes and checking on students with our social workers. They were delivering food and devices. There were quite a few times we had to do wellness checks. We had to go looking for kids because we were concerned about their mental health. We also had to do wellness checks for staff members, and our SROs helped with that. And then eventually, at a certain point in the year, we were able to start bringing students in the building, and they were able to begin connecting with smaller groups of students in the learning hubs. But we really do feel like 2021, last year, really wasn't a great data collection year for us, and the fact that parents didn't have an opportunity to really get to know our SROs, community members, no one was really in the buildings, and so that was a lost year for us as well. So we feel like this year is really our year one of our 3 years, because it is our first year that our staff are getting to know the SRO. You've heard from a couple staff members this evening. Our students have started to get to know the SRO. I've heard a lot of comments from students lately, because once Officer Burnett stopped wearing his mask, kids are like, he actually smiles, and they could actually see his face. And so I think there are a lot of just those little nuances that are starting to develop, and it would be very unfortunate that we're at the beginning of this program to stop the progress that we've made so far. They are both very involved in our school safety efforts. Our crisis committee has had extensive conversations about things that we can do specifically at the high school, but also at the middle school, with keeping things outside. We have had some very negative interactions and just incidents that people in this room and many people in the larger community aren't even aware of the things that we are doing in the building to keep our schools safe and to keep the things that might be coming in from outside out of our spaces. And they are very involved in that. We also have Officer Bain, who's here, is also from Urbana Police, is also a member of that committee. The interim chief Sros, he has been a part of our district crisis planning committee for multiple years as well. So as I mentioned, I know this is really year 3, and everybody came tonight expecting us to have this extensive program evaluation ready to share with you. But we don't have that, and we feel, I kind of hate to blame it on COVID, but it's the true story. Our SROs have just not had an opportunity to do any of the things, not any, I should say many of the things that we wanted them to do. And we are just getting to that point where we are really feeling like it's starting to make a difference. And that is why we're here to enter into another agreement and talk about how we can continue that relationship. So what are some of the other duties? I know we talked about a little bit about some things that they've done the last 2 years. So this is, of course, not an exhaustive list, but these are just a few of the things that we wanted to highlight. And again, most of these are things from just this year, because a lot of these things weren't even possible the last 2 years. So the officers really do serve as a liaison for us between the district and the police department. And I know that may not sound, for some people, that may not sound like a good thing, but for us, it is a fantastic thing, because on weekends and at night, when things are happening in the community and I'm at home in bed, guess who's getting those phone calls? Officer Burnett. Guess who's texting us at 6 o'clock in the morning, so we can be ready on Mondays, especially when those things that happen over the weekend want to creep into Urbana High School, because guess what? They do a lot. And so we have to be ready. We would not have that information were it not for that connection that we have directly with having an officer who is part of those reports and part of those calls and part of those meetings and things that happen. So that is why that bullet is the first bullet there, because we feel like that is one of the most important pieces, not most important, but one of the highest, I would say, things that we need is that liaison connection. Our SROs also serve as a connection to JDC, so the Juvenile Detention Center. Unfortunately, we have some of our young people who are there right now, and we want to make sure we maintain that connection with their students and their families, because we want them back at our buildings. We want them back at the high school. And so we need to maintain that connection, and they're able to do that. I already talked about the crisis team work that they've been doing. This bullet about navigating the court system, I have been surprised when I hear the stories of the students who go to, specifically more so Officer Burnett, our older students who are involved in the court system and have legal questions. And I know he's not an attorney or a lawyer or any of those things, but I think it speaks a lot that our students feel like they can go to him. One of the students, I can't remember which one, tonight, maybe Isis, talked about the confidentiality. They know they can go to him. They may not want Ms. Blixen to know what their family is dealing with or something that may have happened in their home that police may have been involved in over the weekend, but they feel like they can go to Officer Burnett and they can ask those questions and say, what does that mean, or what is going to happen, and that information will be confidential. So I think I've heard those stories, and those are very powerful stories coming directly from kids. At the high school, the Officer Burnett supports and participates in the driver's ed distracted driving class. And you heard from Ms. Doggett, she talked about the business law class that he visits every year. This next bullet might be a surprise to some, but if you were at the high school regularly, you would know this. There are situations where our young people don't feel safe to go home. some days for a lot of different reasons. And then there are times in our community where we have groups that are, the retaliation is real. And there are kids that go to him and say, I'm not comfortable walking home. Will you give me a ride? So I don't know the number of times that that's happened, but I know it happens a lot. And they get in the back of that SRO vehicle, and he drives them home and makes sure they're safe and inside their homes after school. Attending meetings on site when possible threats or safety concerns are made. We have, that happens beyond 8 to 3. So we hear about threats or social media things, or you know, if we've heard or anytime a student shares something that they've seen, or parents, we've had parents reach out to us. I can pick up the phone. I was sitting in my office late one night on a Friday night in at Wiley School, and there were some shots fired in the neighborhood. It was probably 5:30, 6 o'clock, and the after-school staff were still there. They still had students. No one else was there. They didn't know what to do, so they called me. I called Chad. What do we do? And he said, give me 2 or 3 minutes, and I'll call you right back. And so in 5 minutes, I was able to call the school back, tell them what to do, what was going on, who was going to be there to help them, and that was at a Friday evening at 6 o'clock at night. So we reach out to him whenever we need to, and same thing for Officer Robinson, but unfortunately, most of the incidents that have been happening in our community have been our older students, so that is a regular occurrence where we have to have these late night conversations about things, and they're there for us. Vaping and smoking paraphernalia. I was just at a session this morning talking about vaping. So that is something that is happening in our high school, and we're addressing it, and Officer Burnett is dealing with that as well. Assisting students and staff with private property accidents. So you heard one of our young people today in their public comment talked about an accident. I did not realize we had as many accidents in the parking lot at UHS as we do. But we have had several, and I know, but it's not your fault, Ms. Nance. I think part of it is just we need to get that area redesigned, and we have a plan whenever we can get $2 million to go in there, more than a couple. But we need to redesign that area, because as a parent there for the last, 6, 7 years, I have just been glad no one gets hurt at dismissal. But there are a lot of accidents that happen, and as you heard from the student in her statement, they're really upset when that happens, and Officer Burnett is there and able to really help assess the situation. There have been incidents even in the neighborhood that are close by, in the vicinity of the school, where people need help and they come to the school and ask for the SRO. So I know that was kind of a lot of additional anecdotes, but I wanted to kind of spend a little time just kind of talking about those things. They may seem like a bullet on the slide, but they're really important to what happens every day. So on to the feedback. So I did just want to share a little bit about how we collected the feedback. So I did host a lunch session with several students, very well attended. I think Michael was there. I'm going to kind of defer to Michael here in a bit and let him share his experience with that. Officer Burnett came and shared a little bit of his background. I think the students who attended walked away learning a lot about him. I learned some things about him. I found out I knew he had been a teacher before, but I didn't realize he was from a family of educators, a principal, his mom and dad are both educators, brother or sister. It was like, so anyway, it made a lot of sense when I learned that day. So we had a Q&A for students. We had a Q&A for parents during parent-teacher conference night. We had parents come and ask questions. And then we collected feedback via just a regular Google form from staff, and then from students. Sometimes the Google forms are successful, sometimes they're not. So in this instance, we just use anonymous paper forms and no names, and students were able to fill out their feedback forms, and that's how we collected the data. Also, we wanted to make sure that we were comparing apples and apples. So we intentionally didn't ask the students very different questions from the staff. We really wanted to be able to say that staff and students responded and to be able to make some comparisons there. So both groups were asked these same questions. So at UHS, we had 101 staff members respond. And again, if you know anything about surveys, especially with kids, you have to keep it short and simple if you want to get a response. And so that's basically what we did. So having an SRO makes me feel safer. So from staff members, we had 5 people out of this 101 who disagreed with that, and 96 that did agree. I believe having our SRO positively benefits our school, our culture and climate. We had 94 people agree with that, and 7 people disagree. Our SRO helps support our school in other areas beyond safety. So this is kind of that question around making deliveries, and I know our social workers and our clinical professionals rely a lot on the expertise and just having those conversations with the SROs and the support staff and admin. Teachers may not see that on a daily basis. I know administrators do. But even in proposing this question, we still had 90 people who agreed and 11 that did not. Trusting our school SRO. So at the high school, 100 people said they trust their SRO, and then 1 person that disagreed. And then the final question is, are you in support of keeping the SRO at UHS full-time? And that was also 98 people strongly agreed with that, and 3 disagreed. So student ambassadors. So Parker's not here tonight. He had a track meet. I hope he did well, but Michael is kind of holding down the fort tonight. So these next couple of questions were also the same questions that students were asked on the anonymous paper forms that they could fill out. I don't know if the board remembers, but Parker offered to, he kind of started a student ambassador account several weeks ago. And so this was the data from the SRO survey put into the student ambassador Instagram. So I know they're small numbers, but we still wanted to include their voices. So having an SRO makes me feel safe at school, 15 students, and you can see there it's pretty split on this question, which was interesting because on the next couple, they weren't as split. I believe having our SRO benefits our school's culture and climate. We had 13 students respond there, and so I think this was 1 that disagreed and 1 strongly disagreed, and the others agreed with that. And then I'm in support of keeping our SRO in school. We had 16 responses, and you can see the majority of the students agreed with that. So I'm going to stop there since we're talking student ambassador and let Michael share any reflections he'd like to share with students that he's been talking to at the high school.
Yeah, it's ever since I met with him at the lunch meeting, I've been in big support. There's times where I walk past the hallway and I'm like, oh, I guess I got to book an appointment to speak to him. I'm over exaggerating, but it's like his relationships with the students, it's wonderful. Everyone's ready to talk to him. One of the concerns was that he's intimidating, but I've heard ever since the mask has come off, you see the smile, and ever since you talk to him, you know, oh no, he's not that intimidating. But I know I shouldn't do this, maybe not. Yeah, I really like how he believes in communication over stratification. There was a what was brought up about how even though as students we can do things that we're not supposed to do, but he'll still say, "Have a great day." Next time you see him, you talk to him, he won't give you a derogatory category. He's not, he'll forget about it. You can talk to him still without anything. I don't think we can lose that if we have just any other police officer there. We have a higher risk of them not willing to put in that effort to actually do that, and instead of say, no, you're bad, or you're good, or whatever. And so I'm in high favor of keeping them.
Okay, thank you, Michael. So on to the rest of the student feedback. So again, we anonymously gathered information from students at the high school, and we had 158 responses. So from our students, having our SRO makes me feel safer. We had 134 agree with that, and 24 disagree. I believe our SRO positively benefits the school culture and climate. 126 agreed, and 32 disagreed. And we had less questions for the kids. So their third question was, are they in support of keeping the SRO? And 144 of the 158 said yes, and 14 disagreed. So on to UMS, and again, in an effort to be able to compare apples and apples, we asked the exact same questions of the UMS staff. And I know the data is going to look a little different at UMS, but I do feel like it's important for me to note here that we're talking about a lot younger age group of students. I do think it has been more challenging to kind of make some of those connections, and with the age factor. And there've just been other challenges at UMS that we've been dealing with. I know, again, I don't want to blame COVID, but I do feel like having 10, 11, and 12-year-olds at home for a year and a half, when they returned, they just returned as very different young people, and we've spent the year really just dealing with that. And so I do feel like the SRO has maybe not had an opportunity to make some of those inroads there this year, but we're looking forward to, if the program continues, really starting fresh. And we've already we're going to be setting up a time with Mr. Cooper. I know he has some strong views about the SRO and how he'd like to see the SRO integrated into UMS life. And so I just wanted to say that starting off. So UMS staff. So having our SRO makes me feel safer. 55 out of we only had 74 responses there. 55 UMS staff members agreed with that, and 19 did not. I believe having our SRO positively benefits our school's culture and climate. 55 agreed with that, 19 did not. Our SRO helps support our school in other areas, and again, I'm sure the UMS people weren't fully aware of all the things that Officer Robinson does, so this kind of looks like a real pie chart there. 41% or 41 people agreed with that. 17 were kind of neutral, like, yeah, I'm not sure, I don't really know how to answer that. And then 16 disagreed. Trusting the SRO, 58 people agreed with that, and 16 did not. And I'm in support of keeping our SRO. 48 people, whoops, sorry, I'm reading my paper and not looking at slides. 48 said yes, I agree with that, and 16 said no. We did have 2 open-ended questions. I know Member Ogalski and Member Exum have already asked for those, and so I've shared those via email if other board members would like to see those. I do think in the UHS a lot of the feedback was, you know, we please don't take Officer Chad, or we really, you know, people are really feeling like that they are just really starting to break through and seeing some of the positives. I know there were a couple comments that said we could almost use more than one person sometimes. The UMS feedback, I think, was really true feedback, which I'm going to share with Mr. Cooper around, you know, maybe integrating the SRO into classes more, or maybe having the SRO be in the hallway spaces. UMS is a huge building, just as the high school is, and so I think it is hard to be in all the places at all the times when things are happening, but that was feedback from staff, is wanting to see the SRO in a lot of those really high, challenging spaces. So I think the feedback is great. If people want to see those open-ended questions, I'm happy to share those, but we are not walking through all those tonight. So I'm going to stop talking. You've been listening to me for quite a while, and I'm going to have some of the people in the schools talk. Officer Burnett is going to represent both SROs. Officer Robinson's out there, and you know, if you have specific questions for UMS, she and Dr. Weemelt are out there and can answer those. We did invite Mr. Cooper, our incoming principal at UMS. I know he's anxious to establish a relationship with the SRO, and really one of his, and I'm kind of speaking for you, but one of his primary goals as the incoming principal is to really address some of the culture and climate and behavior things that we've been experiencing all year. And then we've also invited Assistant Principal Blixen, who works very, very closely with Officer Burnett because she's the student engagement assistant principal. And then, of course, Principal Nance, who has been very complimentary and outspoken. I know several of the parents who visited the Q&A have very direct questions for Principal Nance, so we wanted to give him an opportunity to share their feedback, and that is also part of the agreement. So I know, again, I'm going to keep saying this over and over again. I know we did not have an opportunity to really gather parent feedback, and one of the reasons is we've not had parents in the building because of COVID. I mean, we've not had visitors. We've not had any of our, a lot of our ongoing programs that we normally would have involving community people. We just have not allowed a lot of people in our spaces. At the beginning of the year, we were very protective of our spaces because of COVID. So I do feel like a lot of, even our parents don't know Officer Burnett. They don't know who he is, unless you've had a negative interaction, unfortunately. But I think just on a day-to-day, a lot of our UMS and UHS families and Officer Robinson as well, they just haven't had an opportunity to be in the space because of our COVID mitigations. So we didn't survey parents, and we weren't able to survey community members. Eldris Carr, I did a little meeting with groups. You know, I reached out to the NAACP, to Miss Minnie Pearson, and talked with her, letting her know, and then NAACP, that we were bringing our agreement back forward before the board, and to see if they had any questions. And she emailed and said, no, she doesn't. She's talked to family members and teachers, and she feels like we're doing a good job of doing the things we said we were going to do. So she didn't really have any concerns. Eldris Carr and the Education Committee from the Ministerial Alliance came and met with Principal Nance and I and Dr. Caffey, our DEI director, and we're going to meet starting next year every month. So that was something that they wanted to do, and we're on board with that. So we did kind of reach out to some of those community spaces. As I mentioned, we have met for the last month, Mr. Nance, every Monday. We have an anti-violence collective that we are meeting with, and we're putting together some individual plans for, and I'm just going to be very frank in this space, we have some of our young people, we just are doing whatever we can to keep them alive this summer. We're gonna have meetings with their parents. And we know when school ends, that is when the world is gonna change for some of our youth. And so we're gonna sit down with those parents. We have some of the violence trained trauma people from the community working with us, Community Coalition, who else? The U of I, Sam Smith, yes, the city of Urbana, Mr. Peppers. So we have a group of about 12 to 15 people, and they've come every single Monday to the table to help us figure out what we're going to do this summer, because we don't want to bury any more kids, and we don't want to have any more funerals. And so that is real for us. And we have a group of young men and young ladies that we're going to do whatever we can over the summer months. We're writing some grants and hoping to be able to use our space across the street from the middle school sooner rather than later to put in some programming where we can keep kids busy and working and doing productive and positive things instead of some of the things that they're choosing to do now. So we haven't had an opportunity to really engage all of the community people that we would like to, but I feel like there are a lot of people who are at the table talking with us and that are wanting to help us help our kids. And so I'm going to stop talking and turn it over to, how about we start with administrators first, Mr. Nance and Ms. Blixen.
You want me to go first?
Yes, of course.
I was about to say good afternoon. I'm tired. Good evening. So, a lot of talk about the SROs, and one of the first things I told the USD administration during our interviews when I was asked a question about SROs, this is my 6th school district, and I've had an SRO at every level from K through 12. Community policing is something that I believe in and strongly believe will set the stage for community police relations. And so speaking as a black man who has actual lived experiences being racially profiled and growing up in areas where, violence was surrounding me, working with the SROs during my 10-year career has helped me unlearn a lot of the things that I was taught. A lot of my implicit biases, being self-aware of, what I mean and what I say and my perspectives are impacted by my experiences, especially the negative ones. And so working alongside SROs for the past 10 years has taught me a lot about myself and, what I want to be and what I want to represent for our students. And so to hear the feedback from the staff and the students, to work alongside Officer Chad, even today we had several instances today that happened. And as I mentioned before, a lot of the stuff that we do, Officer Chad and I, it goes unseen because when you're talking about placing your hands on students and the level of voice and, the cadences and the nuances, and when there's a crisis situation, how do we go from discipline to restorative is something that I don't have to even say to Chad, because within 5 or 10 minutes, because of our training and background, he's able and I'm able to really just work off him. And a lot of times I can leave the area because the student doesn't want to talk to the principal. Because of the work that he's done in our building, they feel much more comfortable talking to him. And I'm the type of person that if you don't need me or if you want somebody to leave the room because you feel comfortable and trust them, that's what I'll do for you. And so to know that a lot of our African American students specifically rely on him is something that teaches me every day that I still got stuff I have to unlearn. And being self-aware of that and reflective of that allows me to be impartial, to be objective in my role with 1,200 kids, 1,200 families. I can't ever be seen as one side or the other. I understand what this job means, and being a black man in this position, I know what pressure comes with that. And so to champion Officer Chad, to champion Ms. Blixen, to champion my white colleagues is something that I have to do. It's intentional. And so I'm not sitting up here championing Chad because, I'm lying for him. He really does what he does. And the prevention is what we can't quantify. We don't know how many fights that Officer Chad has broken up or prevented. We don't know, what all his work that he's done, what it prevents. And so I urge anybody that, thinks that philosophically we shouldn't have our officers in the building to really think about, that prevention piece and really understand that he is a colleague. He is not an officer in our building. And I'm going to continue to champion him and support him. And I'm here for whatever we need. It's to you, baby.
It's always hard going after Principal Nance, but I will try. So 3 years ago, we sat here, almost 3 years ago, we sat and talked about what our vision was for the SRO and what we wanted it to be. And then we hired Officer Burnett to be in our building. I think that it takes a really special person to want to be an SRO. It takes a really special person to want to be in a high school every day when they don't have to be. There's a lot of things that happen on a day-to-day basis in a high school. There's a lot of emotions and hormones, and then you add COVID in on top of it. And not every police officer is going to be able to come in and work in that situation. I've seen it happen where students seek him out when they're having trouble. We have students specifically that if they're having a crisis, he is the one that responds because he's able to talk to them and calm him down. We have students who, there's been instances that have happened around where patrol has had to come or been called from somewhere else. Officer Burnett comes and is able to get that student back to baseline and is able to, where they were reacting poorly to patrol because they don't know that person, but they see Officer Burnett and they know him. He's been able to develop those trusting relationships with our students, and these are our students who have been through trauma with police. These are students who would wear a shirt that said the police, a word in front of it, but you know, really negative things, but now know him and come to him and talk to him. I can't even tell you the number of students that reach out to him for different things. And it's not just legal things. It could be something that they have going on with their boyfriend, their girlfriend, or whatever. It could be something happening at their house that they have questions about. It could be, we have teenagers who are turn 18 and they want to know what their rights are now and what they can and can't do. So they go to him and ask him all kinds of things. We were standing in the hallway one day, and a girl came up to him and asked about a report she was doing because she didn't want to get in trouble for getting on the computer to look up gun laws because she didn't want to get flagged as someone who's like looking up, but she was doing a piece on, doing a research paper on gun laws. And so she came to him to ask about FOID cards and things of that nature, but she didn't want to get, flagged by our system as someone who's going to, be doing something else. So she went to him to say, hey, can you help me with this? So we talk about negative interactions all the time that students, especially people of color, have with our officers and how we can change that. And I think that we have to go back to the roots of community policing. There's stories on the news all the time about different community incentives that have been put in place, like with neighborhood houses where the officers are there meeting with people in neighborhoods. School resource officers are that community policing. His goal is not to arrest kids. His goal is to build relationships with kids, to teach them right from wrong. Just today we had an incident where he worked with a student who is going through some things, a lot of trauma, a lot of past history, and he was there to help him, and he was there to make sure that he knew what resources he had and to provide him with those and to work with him and his mom to make sure that student was safe. I think you can't, like Principal Nance said, you can't quantify what he does in our building just based on the numbers. And if you look at the numbers, it is overwhelmingly in support of keeping an SRO in our building. And I think we have to listen to our staff and listen to our students, because the only way to change our students' perception and interactions with police is to have the community policing in our building so that they can see that there are officers that they can trust, that there are people they can go to. And so numbers don't quantify that. You can't say 67 fights were averted. We can tell you that there are fights that happen a lot that he is not involved in. There are fights that happen all day, not all day, but upon occasion, and they don't result in arrests. He does not, that's not what he's there for. Very few times that we've had to do that or had to go that route have been very justified. And I think that you guys have seen those instances. So it would be really, really sad for our kids. I had some students say they can't take our SRO away. We'll go fight the board. No, you're not going to fight. You're not going to fight anyone. We're not fighting. But they want Officer Burnett. They have nicknames for him. One girl goes, "Bye, Sarge," every day, and as she's walking out. You know, a couple boys have decided he looks like a Brock, so they said, "Can we call you Brock?" And he's like, "Sure." And you know, it's just those relationships that you see, and I think that you can't quantify that. So it's really hard to quantify relationships.
Yeah, I'm going to echo some of the things that were already said, but I mean, the key to a successful school resource officer program is having strong relationships with our staff, students, and families. And I'm a strong proponent of the school resource officer program because I've just seen it really done really well. When we had a school resource officer at our Champaign Central High School, the 2 police officers that we had in our building, they were invaluable to everything we did at our school. They were a part of our leadership team. They were in classroom. They were very visible. That's a major key. They have to be visible. They have to allow students to ask questions. They have to just build those relationships through that visibility. Is just a huge asset to building a safe culture and climate in a school. And our school resource officer did that. So he was also a part like staff presentations and different crisis trainings. I think that's just a huge key, just getting out in front and allowing our staff to really see and get to know our school resource officers is really important. Their presence was very felt when they were there, and their presence was very felt when, like Dr. Tatum mentioned, when staffing got short in CPD, and we moved away from school resource officers to a private security firm, and it was not the same. It was really hard to distinguish the difference between what a security guard would be and what a hall monitor would be. School resource officers are just a really key aspect to just ensuring safety and being a part of the proactive things that has to happen. So I just would really, just want to put that out there and kind of say that again, they were just really invaluable. So I really look forward to working with Officer Robinson in my role as Urbana Middle School principal next year.
So, I'm Officer Burnett. Obviously, I don't know if everybody's met me here or not, but Chad Burnett is my name. I've been in the school for roughly 2 years. I feel like it hasn't been 2 years based on COVID, and I know we've been through COVID and gone through that. Upon entry in February when I started, pre-COVID, I was hesitant. I was the one officer that applied for the position. I felt I had some skills that would benefit and the school could benefit. Along with the police side of it, I felt I could do a good job in the building. So I went for it. COVID hit, kind of slowed things down, derailed things a little bit. I think the students were hesitant. I'm going to be honest, when I first entered the building. There was some derogatory terms shouted as I walked through the hallway behind my back. I just brushed it off, didn't let it faze me, didn't engage those things, those behaviors, because that's what they're looking for. The students are looking to get a rise out of you, and if you don't give them that satisfaction, they're like, well, maybe he's not gonna push the issue like that. So that's how it started, but that's not how it's ending. It's been a very fluid change in the upward direction. I've had several positive interactions. I have ongoing positive interactions with multiple students in the building. And I think that's just being visible, like he said, being in the hallway, being in the hallway at passing periods, inviting interactions with students, saying good morning, saying hi, allowing them to stop and talk to me, ask me questions, letting them feel comfortable with me, being around me, just standing next to me, making them feel comfortable. I am in a uniform. It's a SRO uniform, but it is a uniform. And so they ask questions about that, and we talk about that. We talk about the reasons why we wear what we wear, why you have to wear it in a school, why, and they're responsive and they're accepting more and more of those types of things. They see me more as a person now than they saw me as a person when I started. Obviously, that's the goal, but some of that also is coming from being in front of classrooms, being in the driver's ed area with students, talking about those things, just asking them questions, asking them what they feel is needed. You know, why do you want to drive? What the responsibilities behind the wheel are, and then we just have conversations. So those types of interactions are very positive. You know, there is the negative side of the job. There are altercations. There's verbal altercations. There's physical altercations. I tell the students all the time, and they know this. I make it very clear. I do not want to see you guys hurt. I don't want them engaging in behavior that they're going to hurt one another. And I tell them I will not let that happen in my presence. And they understand that. I'll give you a perfect example. Mr. Corson calls me yesterday, 3:10. He texts me, said, hey, can you meet me at the yellow buses? We have some kids who possibly were going to fight in a bathroom. They're probably going to ride the yellow bus. They're going to walk your direction if you're over there. So I go over there. There's one group waiting on another group. And one student says, hey, here comes Enriqueon. And one other one looks at him because I'm standing right there, and he says, why did you say that in front of him? He's not going to let you do anything. So just being there, and they're understanding my role. They know my objective. If I respond to a fight, they know that it isn't my goal to separate them, put them in handcuffs, and take them somewhere. That's not my job at the building, unless there's some egregious behaviors that is a safety concern that has to happen. Now, we've had a few arrests, I'm going to be honest. Those incidents, I wasn't in the building. The 3 most violent fights we had in the school this year, I wasn't in the building. It could be coincidence, but that's the way it played out. But I think the program is progressing in the right direction. I think the interactions with students, the students becoming more comfortable is the goal with me being in there. The engagement and that, you know, just the mindset of them, the mindset of me. Everybody's starting to understand each other better. There are several students that I know what triggers them, just from seeing in the hallways and being there. I know what brings them back down. I know how to de-escalate them more so than a lot of the staff does. And that's just from interacting with them on a daily basis. They trust me. They know that I'm not there to take them away. They know that I'm fighting for them to be in the building, and that they're safer in the building than they are on the street a lot of these times. And so that's my goal for these kids, to be safe while they're in the building. I try to tell them I want them to be safe outside of the building. And we all know we have community violence issues. We have students in our building who are directly involved in those issues. And I try to talk to them about those things. What happens in the streets shouldn't happen in the streets, but it definitely should not happen in schools. Your parents, I'm talking to students, want you to be safe when you go to school. I want you to be safe when you go to school. I want you to be safe when you're on the street, but I stress to them, street behavior is not acceptable in the school building. And we have that kind of relationship, which is getting stronger all the time. And the more time that passes, the more that builds, the better the program will be. And, you know, the more kids I can get in front of in classrooms with the driver's ed, with the business law, and maybe there's some other things we can start doing as well. But, you know, I'm in the commons during lunch periods, so if kids engage me there, they come up, and if they have their issues, they want to talk to me, we go talk in the hallway. We don't do it in front of others. I won't talk about their problems in front of others, and they understand that. I don't want to sit up here and just talk about the high school. Officer Robinson does a wonderful job at the middle school. I will say that the maturity level at the middle school it's harder at the middle school, I'm sure. At the high school, we have our issues. We've got kids that somewhat are learning de-escalation behaviors on their own. They're starting to get mature, and they can change things. But at the same time, it takes work to allow that to happen. And I think we're both working extremely hard to try to do that. We're trying to build those relationships. So that's really all I want to say. I know we haven't had I know specifically, I haven't had the proper amount of time to build all the relationships I want to build in our building. But I think we're on the right path. So if I could ask for anything, I would ask for time to try to continue the process. That's why I'm here. So I like what I do. I like working with the kids. You know, I like it, you know, working with the staff. You know, it's trying at times. I'm not going to deny that. But I also feel I'm the right person there. I have an extreme amount of patience, more so than a lot of people, believe me. I've got a long rope, so, and it gets pulled on a lot, but they know when and how far they can go. So, and we set those boundaries. So that's all I really have to say, but thanks for your time.
Thank you. We'll have you guys stay just in case there are questions that the board members have that I can't answer. So last piece of this is data. So I know this is a important part of the conversation. John, can you flip back to the FAQ for the gun violence? I think it's on page 4. So I know one of the, yep, so that question there, if you can scroll down just a little bit. So one of the reasons why people don't want SROs in schools, and we talked about this a lot, you know, 3 years ago, is the school to prison pipeline. We know that is a concern. We know in a lot of communities it is a concern, but that is not something you've heard from administration, you've heard from the SRO. That's not our priority. That's not our goal. It's never what we want. And so this data is from the state's attorney's office. It's just showing that while we know, and I mean, we all live in this community, and we see the newspaper, we see the news. We know that we have quite a few of our young people who are engaged in gun-related incidents in the community. That's just our reality, and we're addressing that. So if you scroll up a little bit, John, you can kind of see those numbers. So the 17, 18, 19 numbers are the numbers that Chief Serafin shared initially when we had these discussions 3 years ago. 2021, 22 is the data since we've had SROs in the building while we've been under the agreement, and unfortunately those numbers are still higher than we like them to be, and it's May 3rd, and we already have had 8 of our young people charged with gun-related incidents in the community, not at school, but in the community. So next we're going to talk a little bit, if you want to just keep scrolling, John, that if you, so my point in including that data point is while those are things that have been happening in the community, that's not translating to our buildings. So this is pre 2 officers before 2019 data that the chief brought a couple years ago. So this is when we had the SRO/detective role. And so for 5 years, you can see in a 5-year period, we had 33 total school-related arrests. So 24 of those were directly involved at the Youth Assessment Center. And so again, I can't stress enough, when people hear Youth Assessment Center and hear YAC, some people's minds automatically go to a negative space. But YAC is not a negative space for our young people and not for our families. That's where they get a lot of support. So I just want to stress that again. Of those 33 arrests, 9 of those did end up at the Youth Detention Center during that 5-year period. And then eventually, we had 3 students, 3 school-related incidents that were charged by or did end up in front of the state's attorney's office. So 2 students were charged and 1 was not charged. So that's in 5 years. So that is just showing that even 5 years ago, or prior to us having our 2 SROs, we've just not been generating that school-to-prison pipeline, which unfortunately impacts some other communities. But that's not happening in Urbana. So John, if you want to keep going. So this is our most recent data. And so for, since we've entered into our full agreement, and really this is 3-year data, but it mostly is from the last year and a half, when we've had the SROs engaging more with students. Remember, they really didn't have a space with students for quite a while. So at UHS, there have been 15 incidents generating police reports. 10 of those have been YAC referrals. There was an arrest at school, and there have been 4 arrests off campus. And so when we say off campus, that is where we try to maintain the dignity of our students and our families. So there have been times where we have needed to arrest a student, and instead of doing it at the building and walking a kid out in handcuffs, we have Officer Burnett has gone to their homes, and we've worked out something with the family, and we have been able to take those students quietly from their homes for really egregious things that needed to happen, but that hasn't had to happen at school. And the one arrest that is there, as Officer Burnett said, happened on a day that he was not in the building. UMS, so there have been 14 incidents generating police reports there. 10 of those, again, Youth Assessment Center referrals, which is a positive thing. Officer Robinson did have to take a student directly to youth assessment herself for an incident. And then we did have 3 arrested at school, but that again was as a result from a large fight that happened at the end of the day. Dr. Remel wasn't there that day, and we had parents and students involved, and that did result in 3 arrests. And I don't even think Officer Robinson did that. I think we had community officers at the building, but we included those because those people were arrested on school property, and it did generate from an incident at UMS. So we're being transparent with the numbers, and we included those there. So total, 29 school-related arrests, 21 immediately went to Youth Assessment Center, and then we have had some of our youth taken to the Juvenile Detention Center, and we've had 3 of our young people from school arrests be charged by the state's attorney's office. So I share that to share. I know a lot of the conversations in the community, and when we take this same agreement in front of the city council in another couple weeks, because they'll have the same conversation there, that will be the conversation again, is talking about the school to prison pipeline. And I guess I can't stress enough that that's just not part of what is happening in Urbana. Okay, so now John, you can flip back. And I just talked about those, so I'm going to flip past those. So updates and changes to the agreement. So as I mentioned earlier, we spent so much time wordsmithing a lot of the language in the initial agreement that we did not take it completely apart. We did incorporate language in our goals around the SRO serving as that liaison role. We didn't have that represented in our goals, and we've seen how important that is. I've already talked about that. As anyone who's been in the high school knows, we have added metal detectors to the space, and so we added the role of the SRO in the surveillance piece around metal detection in our operating procedures. Again, just to reiterate those procedures, we have UHS staff who are involved in that, and Officer Burnett's role is the secondary search person. He, of course, is there kind of watching at door 1, but if he's needed to go to door 3 or door 9, we don't want our staff, if they were to be concerned that someone had a weapon on their person, we don't want our SRSs and our administrators doing that. So that would be Officer Burnett's role. So we incorporated that language in. And then fee for services. So I've been having conversations with Mayor Marlin about this. She's been talking as part of our anti-violence collective. The city has to be a partner in that, because the violence that's happening in our community is not a school district issue. It's not just a city issue. It's a community problem. And so, you know, the mayor has been at the table with us talking about possibly the use of some ARPA funds as they're designating that money over the next few weeks to help us get some of our space ready to be able to receive some of the students that we want to work with under this anti-violence initiative. And so the city has agreed to share that expense with us. So we have been paying 100% of the cost for the SRO the last 3 years. The city paid those costs for 25, 26 years prior to that. And so they came to us when Dr. Williams was here as the interim superintendent and said, we can't continue to shoulder these costs. And that's when we brought our formal agreement to the board, just for our new board members who weren't here in 2018-19. But again, I think this says a lot to the relationship that we have with the city. Last year, because we didn't have students in our spaces every day and we were under remote learning, the city did lower the costs, and they took some of those costs while we were remote as well. So moving forward, our costs will be, at least for sure for next year, will be $270,000 of that 360. That is, we only have numbers, unfortunately, for 22-23, because just like we negotiate contracts with our union, the city will be negotiating a contract with the police union over the next year. So we don't have an exact amount of what that will look like in future years, but we do know for next year, our 75% will be $270,000. I think that is it. Questions, comments? I know we presented a lot, but there was a lot to share for.
All right, board members, ambassadors, questions for anybody?
I have a question for Officer Robinson. I was just curious, we heard from Officer Burnett. What is your biggest hurdle or something that you would like to see implemented at the middle school? Because I know that the children coming in are a lot younger than the high school, and sometimes it's hard for them to really understand the full depth of things at, let's say, 6th grade. I mean, I had 3 kids, and I know when they were in 6th grade, there's a lot coming at them. And so it's hard for them to really relate to everything. But what do you find is your biggest hurdle at UMS being the SRO there?
Right now, it's just the kids' behavior this year. Them being home for a year and a half, completely different environment from what we had in 2019. And I think it comes down to a lot of they weren't getting the extra that you get when you're in a school environment when they were at home. So they were learning they lost a lot of the basics they learned in grade school before they came over. Because, I mean, if you think about it, our 7th graders hadn't been in a building since grade school, and then they come into the junior high. But, yeah, our biggest thing is just, I'm going to be honest, it's the blatant, there's no respect between the students and the staff at our school, honestly. We have a lot of kids that are very aggressive in the junior high right now, and I'm not really sure what it stems from. I don't, because they're completely different kids to the ones that are at the high school this year or are sophomores. But it's the environment that we have there right now is very kind of chaotic, and it just comes down to the kids just are not responding to adult authority, even with our staff members, our administration. And just, like, I'll be honest, I wish I could do what Chad does with his kids, because it doesn't work for me, it doesn't work for our staff either. So I don't know if it's just they're just not at that age yet where they can develop that. We also really struggle with the de-escalation. It's very hard to de-escalate them at that point. But with a lot of the kids we deal with that fight a lot of them have background situations. So a lot of them get into the red zone when they get into that fight or flight mode. So if they hit that fight mode, they don't see anything else but red. And they can't even figure out, and that's what we have. And it's irregular. We just have a large population this year that are like that.
Have you been able to actually get to know or I'm sure it's kind of tough since the schools have been closed, but to get to know possibly the students' families to create that bond. I know Officer Burnett was saying that he has a pretty good bond with students, but I was just wondering about families, because I do know you delivered food, you've delivered students to their homes before, things like that. Do you ever have a chance to talk to the students' families very
So,
much?
I deal a lot more with the students' families because the way that I handle things is that I don't talk to the kids unless parents have been notified. If they're not in person with us when we're discussing something, then it's always been over speakerphone and they know that I'm there. So it's a chance to talk. I've made relationships with the families, but a lot of these families that are coming through right now, I've made relationships when I worked on patrol. But I work with the families more. So I spend more time with parents, really, in my school than I necessarily would the kids when it comes to situations. So I'm being requested more by parents for legal advice, for advice on what they can do when they're maybe not happy with the way things are being handled and those kinds of things. I have several families that I'm their, personal officer. So if anything happens outside of school, I'm notified, I'm emailed regularly. I mean, you wake up in the morning, you got 15 emails from things, especially over the weekend. And really big on the same thing as we have the same issue. If something happens outside in the community, it comes into the school. If it happens on social media, it comes into the school. And so there's a lot of times where with us, we're gonna get information from patrol. Hey, we dealt with this situation, we're giving you a heads up. Then we're letting admin know that we were gonna have this problem. We need to get these kids separated and handle this before it happens in the school. So, that's the biggest thing. I know that part of it it's kind of been that the question is, anybody that lives in Urbana, when you fought or had beef with somebody, what did you do? You went and met at Carl Park. You went and met at Comcast across the street from the junior high. Like, there was places you go. So, second semester, I asked, I'm like, well, why are you guys doing this in the school? And their biggest response was, we don't get in trouble for fighting in the school, we get trouble for fighting in the community. So that's the response I'm getting from the junior hires. So that's kind of where it's getting. But it also comes down to if they have, a lot of this stuff is happening on our social media page, and they're battering back and forth, and then it's on site is what they call it. That's specifically what they say. When I see this person on site, I'm going for it. So as soon as they see that person, first thing in the morning, 8 o'clock, that on site hits. And then it just sets the mood for the day.
I just had one last question. I'm sorry, other board members. Do you and Officer Burnett ever have a chance to sit down and speak about things that might be happening between both schools, let's say siblings or a family with siblings? Do you ever have that chance together to interact and talk about things that might be related to both schools since so close proximity?
Oh yeah, if Chad knows something, if one of his students has an issue and he knows there's a sibling in my school, he's gonna let me know.
Okay.
Same thing with him. I mean, we work together today in a situation. There's a lot of times we have students cross schools, the buildings being so close, and so we work well. And so if we hear, like if I hear something in my school is gonna go down after school with a high school student, Chad's notified. If he hears something, I'm notified. So that's a way to keep things back and forth, because we also have issue between high school kids and junior high kids.
Right.
And so that can be an issue.
Thank you.
Any other board members?
Yeah, I would like to kind of maybe switch gears a little bit and talk a little bit about the kind of like establishing the validity of the program if and when potentially these officers in front of us are no longer with the program. I know back in 2019, we spent a lot of time specifically talking about performance evaluation and evaluation of the program. And I guess I'm still not convinced. I understand that there are feelings about evaluating during COVID, but I'm understanding what is actually in place to evaluate the program. So that's like part of that, but also in that evaluation, currently what I'm seeing in the data is unfortunately, again, like it's less than 1% of the students have responded, right? Is it out of 2,000 students?
1,200.
Okay. So maybe it's 5%. I mean, it's pretty low. So I guess I'm still curious, like, yay, we're getting some students to participate, but I feel like we actually really need to be actively working to increase that information, because we're heavily relying on that right now from both teachers and students, and it's very low. And yes, it's important to hear positive stories. I think that's a concern. But I also think we need to leave space for the places that it's not working, and why is it not working, and how do we make that better? Because I'm not really hearing sort of some of those nuances. But yes, evaluation and performance is a big piece of this, and making sure that I think there was efforts being made to, like, I don't know, more like 1 year, like yearly evaluations, not after the 3 years, and how that's being structured moving forward. So that's one question.
So I have had several conversations with, again, we don't have an evaluation. Again, these are Urbana police officers, so we give feedback to their evaluation tool. So I've talked to, what's your new title? Deputy Chief Bain back there, and the interim chief, Sros, and so we have a feedback form. The agreement specifically asks for administrator input into the evaluation, so we have a form that is going to Urbana Police. We're setting up end of the year meetings. Again, as I stressed, we did not feel that we could put forth a rubric for this year for just a few months of in-person. Moving forward, that is the plan for the upcoming agreement. God forbid, we have to be back in a situation where we're not having teachers and staff and families in our buildings. So we'll be able to do that with the upcoming agreement. And you talked about a lot of other things I'm trying to remember. Oh, survey data. I mean, other than quitting my job and camping out at the high school, and I don't know how many times I sent the survey out, and Mr. Nance sent the survey out, and
our
paper
students,
copies, and
I
even
mean,
with staff.
yeah,
I think I sent the UMS one 5 or 6 times. I mean, surveys are just really, really difficult, and I think we're utilizing that so much. People are surveyed out, and that is one of the reasons why I offered up the Q&A. Just to be able to get some more qualitative, I know Mr. Pulowski came to the parent one, is because people are done filling out surveys. I'm just being honest, and I mean, I've sent it out multiple times. So I think later, in the next agreement, I'd love to be able to do some focus groups and, have those set opportunities. I think the getting to know opportunities that the kids have had with Officer Burnett, even at the high school, were really meaningful. I know Student Ambassador Michael talked about that, like what he walked away with after being in that space. So that is our goal moving forward. So did I?
Yeah, I mean, I fully respect the struggle for the survey. I guess if we're relying on that as a big piece of the evaluation process, we should shore that up.
Sure. Principal Nance was going to make a comment.
I was going to say, just speaking in terms of the culture and climate of our building, our teachers' plates are, stacked high to the sky, and we've had so many different building and district surveys related to curriculum instruction that for us to push what we have pushed and pushed for them to fill out the SRO survey, we just got a little to no feedback, because they're like, between the 30 emails they get from me and it's just, it's going to be hit or miss, and we're missing right now with our additional surveys. So we're trying to, be creative as well. But in terms of them completing it, it's voluntary, and, that's where we are with that.
And I wanted to add that with the paper surveys, I did go table to table in the lunchroom and give student surveys, and then they didn't have to put their name on it. So I did get a wide variety of people to respond to the survey, and some were like, I just don't want to. I'm not in the mood to, because they're teenagers, and they're going to just not want to do things. So I did try to get as many during the lunch hours as I could. So.
And then one other question I had is, I know another concern that was brought up 3 years ago is the training. And so I think it's really important when we're talking about training that we're looking at training opportunities outside of just a single organization. So, you know, like what are ways in which our SROs can have training with, you know, social workers and educators, not just SROs training SROs. So I think that's important.
So, Mr. Nance was gonna jump in before me. So we are meeting with, Karen Sims. I don't know if anybody here knows her, but she's part of our anti-violence collective. So this summer, I've already, it's like a $15,000 training that we're going to be, putting quite a few people in the district through. It's a trauma-focused cognitive behavior training. And I can't speak to the amount of time that I know Officer Burnett works really closely with the social workers. But again, I know you guys can speak to that better than me. So why don't, if you want to share some of the other trainings that you've done.
I think one of the better trainings that I've attended in the past year during the COVID time was mental health first aid for youth. Youth mental health first aid was the name of the training. It was put on by the Vermilion County Health Department. Their mental health staff over there put on the training, and it was very significant in the fact that they talked about specific disorders, and then they put you through scenarios where you had to try to identify the disorder, and then how are you going to react to that disorder? How are you going to handle that situation? What things are you going to do? What steps are you going to take? Who's going to be involved? Who do we call next? You know, and that was one of the better trainings that I've had in the past year. So.
And we're bringing that training to our SRSs and student engagement advocates at the end of the year. We're going to get them all, youth mental health first aid training as well.
And, you know, when we go to trainings, there's the theory and the application of the theory. So de-escalation is, you know, obviously one of our, you know, major stressing points whenever we have a crisis situation. So today, Officer Chad and I had to, you know, be involved with a situation with a student. And then once we got that student isolated, Officer Chad dropped down to one knee, and student got de-escalated and was able to talk that through. So I think about all of the theory that I learned over the course of 10 years, and I see him applying that. And so, you know, and even that moment, it allowed the other people in the room to kind of just come back down as well. So those are the types of things that the trainings and then the theory and the application. So I see that from him daily.
I will speak to that particular incident. I'll speak to that particular incident itself. That young person, let's say, I've had multiple contacts with her at the school. I've had to take her home. I had to take the student home a couple different times for various reasons with mom's permission. I've talked to mom personally before. I knew she was escalated. There was a few people in the room. I said, I need you to look at me. I need you to just look at me. I said, I know we've had a relationship in the past. I said, no one's here right now to hurt you. We're on your side. I did. I dropped down to one knee. I said, I need you to kind of just talk this through so we can bring you back down. It wasn't a physical altercation of any sort. There was no police presence needed necessarily, but I was familiar with her. I was in the area, and there was a call for all the help we can get to our foods lab, which is not a safe area for something to escalate. So I entered. We got her to another space away from people, and she talked it out. I mean, she was able to then tell us what happened, what took place, and then we asked her, "Are you okay? Are you hurt?" And she said no. And at that point, Mr. Nance left. We let her vent on her phone to someone, and then her mom came and picked her up. But I mean, it's just working together. Like he said, we kind of know who triggers, who doesn't. You know, if one can make someone feel more comfortable, one bows out, the other steps in. You know, it's just working as that team and just trying to get the response that's needed, and that's for that particular student at the time. It's the only way we can make it work. And the biggest thing with the altercations at school, we try to get it separated as quick. You have a room this size, you may, if you have a physical or verbal argument ensue, you've got 15 cell phones and 60 people in this area. You have to get it calm down. You have to get it separated. So we try to move people to an area away from others, and then there's not the show per se, and things calm down a lot faster. So once you get them to an isolated area and get everybody else back to where they need to be, that it stops. I mean, and if the quicker that happens, the less problems you're going to have the rest of the time. So that's our philosophy anyway. That's what we try to do.
You done, Laura? Anyone else? Brian.
Just a couple comments and then a question. And one, I emailed Dr. Ivory Tatum before, so I'm just publicly just making the recommendation again regarding the survey data, which by my estimation is about something like 12 or 13%, which is, not terrible for a survey that, at this time of year. But for me, not knowing who's filling it out is just it's so unfortunate. And I'm begging that the next time we do surveys, at least ask a race question so we have a sense.
So Brian, can I respond to that? And I didn't want to put it all in email because I knew we were going to talk about it.
Sure.
So if we want students, and again, I've had 2 teenagers go through, and we want kids to complete this survey for one. And if we start asking too many identifiable questions, they're going to not think it's anonymous anymore. I'm just being very frank. And if we want honest opinions from kids, we have to keep it simple. And if they think we're asking, like, what grade are you in, and what's your race, and if they think there's any way that we're going to be able to tool down and see who they are, I don't know that we will get all of the, so that's part of the reason why, at least for the students, we don't do that very often. But I hear that, and maybe we can have some comparison points, and we can put some demographic questions and see what kind of responses we get moving forward. So.
Sure, and I hear that 100%. It's this delicate balance of saying, do we lose a few respondents, or do we look at data and we say, all right, we have 158 responses, and then we have to take at face value from administrators that we did our best to get representation. And surely we can trust that, or we cannot trust that. And if we have the data points in front of us, at the very least, then we have what we have, and we can say, we have some representation, we don't have representation. It just makes opinion data so difficult to make sense of. But I do appreciate that we have some data. I just struggle a little bit to make sense of what it is that we have. And then the other comment, so both Representative or Member Exum and I both did get the open-ended data, and I tried to make sense of it as best I can. And I would say the comments in the room are well represented on those open-ended. So I hear a ton of endorsement here for what Officer Burnett's doing at the high school. The high school data was overwhelmingly positive in the open-ended. And I read the middle school feedback, and I was less clear on what sense to make of it. And I hear a little bit about the struggles that are going on in the building. I hate to put Dr. Wiemel on the spot if he's willing to talk just a little bit, like the other administrators are, about the experience in the building of having that SRO, what his experience has been. I don't know if that's an acceptable question or not, but I'm going to ask it anyway, and he can say yes or no if he's willing. Sorry to put you on the spot.
We, in the interest of time, we didn't have every single person come forward.
Sure,
so
I'm sorry.
We kind of picked and chose who because we knew we had 2 presentations. No, you're okay. If you want to go, you can. I know it's late.
So my response is similar to Officer Robinson, but a little bit different, and that makes sense as a principal versus the SRO perspective. But so how it's similar is where we've seen the most benefit from having an SRO in the building this particular year, and every year, but definitely this year, is helping problem solve and have dialogue and conversations with families who are in the building and upset about something, whether it's how their specific student is experiencing school and wanting guidance and feedback on, beyond the school's consequences, what else is possible for us, whether or not it's a bullying situation, whether it's a physical, a fight, if a student or family feels that their student was the victim of something. historically, before an SRO, and if the SRO is not there and families are asking those questions, I have to try my best to answer them, right, from a principal perspective, or call Urbana Police and ask for a patrol officer who then is able to answer those questions, but not outside of the context of school, right? And that person or that patrol officer won't understand the ins and outs of school. So the biggest benefit, to answer it really briefly, or to the point rather, is those conversations around guidance and support for families on decision making on when to file a police report and when not to. What happens if they file a police report around something that happens with their child or them as a family over the weekend or at school or at night, in or out of school. It's the mentoring and the guidance that is offered by the school resource officer that you don't get without an SRO. Where I think where I see my perspective different from what Officer Robinson had shared was I view our students' behavior a little bit differently in that they're desperately seeking structure, and they're desperately seeking relationships and struggling through those right now. I don't view it as just defiant behavior, disrespectful behavior. I view it as still really trying to seek those relationships and structure and support. And having an SRO in place, right, we've heard the perspectives and stories at the high school with the direct conversations with high schoolers with Officer Burnett. That is not quite what the experience is of our SRO at the middle school level. There's not a ton of dialogue from student to SRO, much more dialogue, as she shared, between family and SRO, which makes more sense, right? They're obviously not old enough or not as old as high schoolers to have those more mature conversations. So was your question kind of how it's playing out, or like my perspective on the strengths, or?
As, you know, the new person in the conversation, for me, to me, the SRO at the high school and the SRO at the middle school are being lumped into one conversation.
Got it.
And I'm not sure if these are mutually exclusive conversations or not. So I hear a lot of admin from the high school endorsing, but I don't hear the middle school conversation.
Yeah, sure. So my biggest endorsement would be what I shared in regards to the family support, the family conversations. But definitely what I haven't mentioned is what they did mention at the high school also is the information that comes to us in advance based on something that has happened overnight or over the weekend. That's definitely a middle school experience similar to the high school experience, where kids come in and there's a big incident right at the beginning of the day as students are coming off the bus because of something that happened or getting ready to happen that we found out about the night before. So we're able to meet students outside at the bus, walk them off the bus into the school, and we would have never known that before, or without an SRO, we didn't know those things before. So that's a huge benefit that's similar between middle school and high school, is that broader community issues going on either on social media or in the parks or whatever that's going on. For example, I don't remember exactly when this was, but there was a large fight at Thomas Paine, not Thomas Paine students, but the Thomas Paine playground over a weekend, and it involved about 8 or 9 middle school UMS students, and we found out, and some high schoolers, and we found out on a Saturday or a Sunday, and we were able to reach out to those families, put some plans in place for that Monday to be able to have some safety plans as they came back into the building. So those are things that are very similar between the high school and middle school experience of having SRO. I would also say the other really important piece is the matter of the fact that we have issues with weapons in our schools at the secondary campuses, right? And so, and I don't mean that to say like we find weapons every day, but there's always that question that's out there, and we have the weapon detectors at the high school and the ability to move them over to the middle school. We went into full lockdown in the fall because of the threat or the reports of there being a gun at school. Having an SRO on site makes everyone feel a little bit more at ease with when those serious situations come up, versus having to call 911 and the time that it takes to get staff there. So that particular example in the fall with the lockdown, we were in communication with our SRO Robinson, SRO Burnett the night before, and we had plans in place right away at the beginning of the day to go right into lockdown. And I don't know that we would have been able to do that without SROs. So what he's doing directly with students, we don't have as much at the middle school. I'd like to see us do more of that directly with students. The work in the hallways and in the lunchroom, we need to do a better job of that at the middle school. But what's really strong is that work with families and the proactive stuff. So,
Anyone else? And
I'll go ahead. I know you're waiting for me to say something. So I'm looking at this. I'm looking at it the way I looked at it way back in 2018, 2019. And I'm sorry, I'm going to try and be as quick as I can because I know how late it is. The reason why we increased this presence for anybody who wasn't here back in 2018 when we had that horrible riot that happened in riot's a terrible word to use, but I mean, for lack of, it was a large melee at the high school, 2018, we increased the presence just for a temporary measure for the semester because things were out of control and we wanted to control it and get it back down to manageable levels. Then we started to have the discussion for full-time officers. And at the time, it was only half time for both schools. Now it's full-time for 2 schools. So we increased it like by 4 times. The question I asked then and the question I ask now is, it's philosophical for me. Philosophically, what does having an actual police officer provide that our own staff cannot provide? And I'm not aiming this at any one particular person. That's why I said philosophically, because I know that the officers we have are specifically trained for our kids, and all I hear ever is wonderful information about both of you and that you do a stellar job, and I think that's great. But philosophically, all I have to go on right now is anecdotal data of how good people feel or don't feel about having these people in our buildings, and that there's a lack of other type of data that's out there in the world to prove that SROs do what they're supposed to do. And I also know that even if we did want to get people to tell us how they felt, we're not hearing how they feel. So we have got close to zero really reliable information from anecdotal data. We can't keep relying on that. But even if we could, it's still anecdotal. I can feel more safe by turning a light on in my house when I go to bed at night and think that that will deter somebody from breaking in. I have no proof that it will work, but it makes me feel good in the moment. I'm not applying that simplistic comparison to this, but it is still based on feelings. And we're hiring police officers. They are trained as police officers. They are paid by the city. They were up until now paid by the city to get all the training the police officer does. But we're paying the salary, and we have zero accountability for them. They don't report to us. They don't give their performance evaluations to us. They give them to their commanding officers in the police force. We pay for the uniforms, the weapons, the cars, everything else. And at the end of the day, if one of them gets replaced, as a contract said that we signed 2 years ago and still says, if we don't come to an agreement on who is going to be the person who replaces that officer, the police department has the ultimate say. Now, that may never come to pass, but I don't really like the idea of paying all of this money for someone who we don't have any accountability over for their day-to-day performance, and if they need to be replaced, it could be somebody who's not well qualified for the position. And it's not based on anything that says SROs are doing what they're supposed to do. The data I just saw tonight, lacking anything on anecdotal evidence, the numbers evidence says to me that we're still not getting any results in prevention of major discipline infractions than we did before we had the 2 full-timers. Maybe I'm reading those numbers wrong, but having been here on the board for enough years, seen the disciplinary hearings that I've had to sit through that I don't wish on anybody, it's dismaying to see that I don't see that anything's really changed. And so why are we paying all this money when we can pay that money for actual support staff who work in our district, are accountable to us? We do our own evaluations of their performance. We vet them. We make sure that they've got the qualifications they need. Because I know that our clinical professionals and our student support staff do the work they're supposed to do. We do not have enough of them. They tell us this all the time. I would prefer to focus our money and our energy on hiring more of those people who work with us. In the philosophical question of the things that SROs can do for our district, every single time a different point was brought up, I thought in my mind, could this job be done by somebody else? If it's about what's going on in the weekend and we need a liaison between the district and the police department, why couldn't a district staff member also get status reports from the weekend from the police department? Why couldn't there be an Urbana School District liaison who works with the police department, who gets those reports and disseminates them to the staff on Monday morning? Why don't we have support staff to be working with the families more, working with the kids to make them feel safe, to make connections. The discipline is tanking in our schools because of the pandemic in a large point. But second of all, everybody knows that when administration in any school setting changes, discipline dissolves to a certain extent. There is upheaval from the staff down. And unfortunately, our district has had a lot of upheaval in the past 3 years, not even counting COVID. I'm so glad that we've got new administrators in here who seem dedicated to do the work, and I welcome you, and I'm so thrilled that you're here and want to help us. But I can't help thinking that some of the discipline is a result of that, and that the police officers aren't actually contributing to making it better or worse. They're just there, they're extra people to help. So this is these are my long-standing questions. I've always had them. You know this about me. I'm providing this for the benefit of people who may not be new to the conversation. And I am not casting aspersions on any one particular person, because I think that everybody's doing their utmost for our kids. And that's all I'm thinking about. And I think that you know where I stand, so.
And I'm glad you brought that up, and I was trying to get John's attention to pull up the SEL charts, please. Thank you.
I was looking at that, yes.
So there's a document in the back, no, can you pull up the SEL chart? So, and I prepared this just for you, and I didn't even show it. I'm so mad at myself.
During the meeting.
So there's the chart, John, it looks like this. There's SEL, the student, the social emotional learning supports for the district. So I compiled this the last time we did this 3 years ago, and we talked about the positions, because that is one of our frequently asked questions, right? Is we would rather spend our funds to have more social workers and to have more clinical professionals. So if John can make that a little bit bigger. The sheet that you have in front of you is the district wonderfully added several positions in 2019. We added social workers, we added clinical professionals, we've added student engagement advocates who work with attendance. Unfortunately, I wish we could hire more of these folks, but right now we can't even find them. So in the highlighted areas, we at Thomas Paine, we have had those 2 social worker positions have been unfilled since January. So they had one person. We've had an open position at Thomas Paine all year, social work, and we never could find a qualified candidate. The social worker who was there resigned in December, and we've not been able to fill it. Same thing for clinical professional. We added clinical professional positions. We're paying for a lot of those out of ESSER, using our ESSER dollars to add some of those 2 years ago. And we've not been able to fill them. So this year we have an elementary, a middle school, and a high school clinical professional position open. So I agree with you, Ann. I think we have budgeted, if you go to the last page, the first time I think I shared this with the board, it was just at $3 million in terms of the positions that these student support positions. And right now it's at 3.2 million. When Mr. Nance and Mr. Cooper, as new people to our district, came, they both have expressed, I cannot believe the amount of supports that are in place in our district. And I think that is a commitment on behalf of this board and previous boards to make sure that we have those support staff. I know at the middle school there is a really clear structure on how the student engagement advocates, the restorative practice facilitators, the clinical, we call it alphabet soup, the clinical professionals, the SRSs, they're all part of grade level teams, and they all work together to support the kids on those teams and at that grade level. So I agree. I think we are wealthy in our supports in our district. I can't speak to every district in this area. We invest a lot of time, a lot of money, a lot of human capital in the SEL position. So thank you for bringing that up, because that is definitely something I knew you were going to bring up, and I wanted to make sure that we talked about that. In terms of the data piece, and again, Joe looks like he was getting ready to turn his, no, is it about the alphabet soup? Yep, okay. And Yeah, I was gonna say, in terms of data, I know it's very, very hard to quantify, as I think Julie said, the things that we're able to prevent. And I just don't know how to capture that data. I know I was at the high school after a big fight at the beginning of the year when a kid threatened and, you know, said, my uncle's gonna pop, 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 and 15 minutes later, somebody's house got shot into because that kid called their uncle, and then the uncle drove up to our building and jumped out of his car, and he was ready to come in our building. And guess who was standing at the front door? Officer Burnett. And he got back into his car with the gentleman who drove him up to our door. He was coming into our building to get the kid who fought his niece. And if Chad had not been standing at the door, I don't know what I would have done, or Julie. And so, go ahead.
Dr. Harvey Tatum, what I was going to say goes along with that. Until I used to say that, ask the same questions that you were just asking, Ann, until I was responsible for 900 lives, 180 days a year, and it feels like once a week we're dealing with stuff like Dr. Harvey Tatum just shared about when someone fights someone else and they say they're going to get their brother or their cousin or their uncle, and sometimes they show up. Until you're responsible for those 900 lives day in and day out, it's a whole different perspective when you're living it on a daily basis. And I get to go home at night. Our kids, and a lot of our kids and families, this is every day, all day. And so that's why the safety questions that we have to ask ourselves with the importance of everything that wraps around the social emotional supports and the broader safety as it relates to weapons in our community and the violence in our community and other communities is, I used to ask those same questions without the lived experience of running a school of 900 lives every day, and parents asking me on a regular basis, what are you going to do to keep my kids safe from the kid that just threatened to kill them last night on social media? That's real, and that's the hard part in this work.
And I'm going to steal from Principal Nance something that I've heard him say, is that, you know, we all have car insurance. We don't want to have to use it. But things happen where we do have to use it. And you're not going to drive a car without insurance. And unfortunately, having a school resource officer is like having that insurance. You don't want to have him in those situations, but it's something that's necessary to have a school, because you never know when you're going to need something. You never know when the kid that has been quiet all year long is going to have some kind of freak out. Luckily, we have these detectors in our building, but you don't know that kids have ways of getting things that we don't know. And so you can't quantify. I mean, those are things you can't quantify. Prevention is not quantifiable in that regard.
Y'all know me, full transparency, the Anti-Violence Collective is really targeting about 50 students who Dr. Ivy Tatum and I know have the potential, if not already, to brandish a weapon, to get a hold of access to a weapon, and to use that to potentially harm a student. And so we're trying to wrap around those 50 kids with this collective. And so to think about having 2 or 3 of them back in the building for the next school year without this type of work that we're doing, without our resource officers, I'm terrified, I'll be honest with you, because 1 or 2 of those kids changes the entire dynamics of our hallways, of our cafeterias, of our teachers. So the fear is real. I don't think we talk about it enough in open spaces, but I can say a couple last names in my building, and it'll rock 90% of my staff. And so trying to get ahead of the summer, I feel like we're behind a little bit, but we're making strides. But you know, this work is all encompassing, and it's multi-layered, it's multifaceted, and you know, we just need all the tools in our toolbox ready to be activated when necessary. And so I just encourage you to think about just, you know, every email, every student, every type of student that we have at Urbana wants to feel some sort of safety and security. And so you know, it's a delicate balance, but collectively we make it work day in and day out.
And I appreciate that, and I appreciate that you are living it more than any of us are sitting here at the board. You know, we see the terrible stuff that you bring to us, and not the day-to-day grinding down. And I give kudos to every one of you for that. And honestly, one thought crossed my head when I was listening to all of you is, Officer Robinson and Officer Burnett, I would love for you guys to work for us as clinical professionals because you sound like so well qualified and you relate with our kids so well. Stop being cops and come work for us in the district because I'm sure you'd be valuable contributions. And I sound like a pill by saying this, and I'm not trying to be a jerk. I'm saying I know insurance works for your car because we have lots and lots of studies that prove that it does. But lacking lots of evidence that has been done nationwide. I mean, I've been looking on the internet. There's a school district in La Crosse, Wisconsin, who did this exact same kind of evaluation this past year and said that their own SRO program was lacking because they could not prove evidence provide evidence that proved that the program itself was evaluated efficiently to say it's doing its job. And I'm trying to find stuff like that because I'm looking at the bigger picture of like, we're all terrified. I know the fear is real, Mr. Nance. I hear it from you and everybody else, and I hear it from the kids too. It is real. I want to use the right tool to stop what's going to be happening, and I want our district to be able to pay for it in a way and have people accountable to us, that we know there are employees and we're doing the right thing because all the evidence is telling us that over the long term it works, which is why I've said clinical professionals and support staff, they do work. We know this. We have hard evidence. Police officers, much more gray area to me and in all the things I've read. So I'm not trying to put a wet blanket on people's feelings here and say that I'm being uncaring and unfeeling. I do care and I do feel. I have to, in my position on the board, I have to be able to ask these really obnoxious questions because it's down to what's going to work. We have limited resources. We got to make sure we throw our resources at the one thing we know is guaranteed to provide results so that our kids are all safe.
Yeah, thank you, Ann. Anybody else?
Yeah, I mean, we've had so much discussion. I think we could go on all night, which is definitely not something that I want to do. I personally want to thank our two SROs. Walking into a school building to work in any capacity is not an easy thing. To be in the particular role you're in is not an easy thing. I think you both do a great job at it. I'm at the school and I see you guys at work. I'm probably in the high school definitely this year a lot more than the middle school. But I was at the middle school today that a parent wanted to come and pull a kid off of the bus to fight a kid. So I see and know what's happening in our schools, and I can't pretend that these things are not happening and that the people that we have in place are not helpful. It's not just a feeling of being safer. We are safer, whether we want to admit it or not, whether people want to believe it or not. The environment, I do think, is safer. You know, I definitely want to commend both of you. I don't know if I've ever told a story or if you even know Officer Burnett about the life you saved during COVID. There was an instance where a high school student was using a Google Chromebook to like Google ways to kill herself. And Julie Blixen and Officer Burnett ended up going to that student's house. That student's parent, who I happen to know, actually said, I wouldn't have even opened the door if I hadn't seen the police officer there. That's why I would have ignored Ms. Blixen. Sorry, Ms. Blixen. But I saw the police officer there, and that led me to open the door. That kid's life was probably saved that day. Just from you saying, you know what, I'm going to go with you, jump in my car, we're going to ride. Things like that you don't even know about. We don't even hear those stories. I heard that story because I knew the parent. There's so much going on in our community, in our school. I mean, we've got to look at this realistically. People are not lining up to come and work in school buildings. I'm sorry, Ian. We can put out as many bids to have positions for mental health people. They're not lining up to come to schools. And they have a lot of options right now. Schools is not what they're choosing. So we can throw as many dollars as we want. That $3.2 million doesn't even include benefits. It doesn't even include benefits. Let's think about that. And I'm not saying any of it's wasted. I think it's needed. I think it's helpful. I see a lot of those professionals in the school. They do their best. They're working hard. And we're going to keep them. But I think we have to think about the other element and the fact that while we can say, let's put a social worker in this position, and this is not a knock to any social workers, I might be able to argue that he may have more people coming to him with issues than our social workers. It's a reality. I don't think either of them need to go off and be mental health and social workers. They do it every day. If we could have more police officers like them in the streets, well, I'm not going to even go down that road because that's not what we're here for today. But we have an opportunity for Urbana to set the map. We have the opportunity for us to show other districts how it should be done and how it can be done and how it can be done well. And to sit and say, well, the numbers really haven't changed, but man, look how the community has changed. You can't compare what happened in 2019 to 2022 and say, oh, the numbers look the same. I mean, you can, but the reality is our community is very different between 2019 and 2022. And if we don't see that as board members, I mean, that's a problem. Our schools are different than they were in 2019. I'm in them. I was in them in 2019. I'm in them in 2022. Take some days off and spend it in these schools. Again, that's not a knock to you because maybe you don't have that privilege like I do to be able to take that time off. But I encourage you, if you do, let's not just go for events. Let's not, our visit to the Commons be a visit the first time in the last 15 or 20 years. Have lunch with these kids. They will talk to you. And let me tell you something, they are not intimidated by Dr. Ivory Tatum. And if you sit here and think that our kids are intimidated, you clearly are not in our schools. Clearly. Because they will give Mr. Nance a piece of their mind. They'll tell Dr. Jennifer Ivory Tatum about herself, and they won't think twice about it. But you'd know that if you were there. So let's be present. Let's understand our staff needs. Let's understand our kids don't do surveys. Sorry. I know you like numbers. Our kids don't like surveys. We can give them $5 each. It's not going to make a difference for a lot of them. What is $5, Miss Torrey? I'm not taking $5. They don't want another survey. They'd rather have a conversation if they have to. Black people don't want to put that they're black on the surveys. I'm sorry. It's a cultural thing. You wouldn't understand. But Mr. Nance understands. It's just the reality of us, our people. I can't explain it to you in a way that you're ever probably going to ever get it. But it is what it is. I can't say I agree with it all. Sure, Mr. Nance doesn't agree with it all. But there are some cultural things for us just in a survey in general, to be honest with you. So the fact that she was able to get as diverse of a group as she talked about, kudos to you. That means they trust you. And that's what we need. We need people these kids can trust. We need to give them an opportunity to grow and learn and make mistakes in a safe environment without being arrested. You can't tell me that's not what we're doing. You can't tell me that when we have to call a police officer because we've made the bright decision to take our SROs out of the school, guess what? We can take our SROs out of the school. We'll never take our police out. We'll never take our police out. Now we have to call somebody who doesn't even know our kids, doesn't have a clue. They don't have any of the training. Maybe we don't do enough training, but they may not have any in regards to how to deal with a kid in a school who may have mental health issues, who may be going through all sorts of stuff. They are a street cop, and they come to determine, was a law broken, and do I need to arrest somebody? Is that what you want in our schools? It's not what I want. I'm not looking for a street cop to come and arrest our kids. I'm looking for an officer who's going to build a relationship, who's going to prevent some of these kids from potentially killing themselves, killing others, or being killed, or being hurt. We got to think logically here. You know, we don't have to play devil's advocate for everything. Let's be logical. Let's listen to them. Let's listen to our staff. Let's visit. Let's form our own opinions. That's what we're charged to do. We're not here to sit and have my own personal agenda about what I'm thinking in my head and what we should do. We are tasked and charged with doing what's right, with vetting, with not just asking questions, but being present, that's our responsibility. Take it or don't take it. I'm in support. I don't have to say. I think it's very clear. I'm in support. I have physically seen the difference. I work with youth groups all the time. I have talked to kids who hated police officers coming into the high school, hated them. Again, it's a cultural thing. In some families, we're taught to hate police officers. That's a reality for some of our kids. And for them to walk out and like know Chad by name, and one of them walked up to me, I was in the high school 3 days this week. You better not be messing with Chad over there with those board members. Again, they're not holding their tongue. You just gotta go talk to them, get a chance to know some of them. Once they figure out you're a person who might be making some decisions, hey, you're gonna hear a lot from them. So again, I'm gonna stop, but board members, we gotta step our game up. That's the reality. We have to step our game up. We have to be logical, because the minute we stop being logical, guess what? We're going to more funerals next year. Get ready. Get ready to look those other kids in the face when they're walking into school, and now they have additional issues that they're dealing with because of a decision that was made right here by the 7 of us, potentially even based on pride, based on the opinion of a few. Better think a little heavier on this, because lives are at stake.
I was just thinking that, Tori, what Dr. Wiemelt said was so true. When you're responsible for that many children, you look at the price we're paying the SROs, it's very well worth it. Not only for the students, but for the staff also. Because
one life.
We want the staff to
worth?
feel safe. Exactly. How can you put a price tag on that? And if we can secure their safety by having these SROs who are building relationships with not only our students but our families, it is money well spent, in my opinion.
If we had been able to do some of this earlier, some of the stuff we're dealing with maybe could have been curbed. It's a reality. I'm gonna stop though, because I can talk all night.
I was gonna, because I think this is relevant, and Dr. Wiemelt, I'm not gonna put you on the spot, and I know it's late, but Tori did bring up one point I wanted to mention is Officer Robinson her daughter had some health issues, so there were some times she had to be out of the building this spring, and when we have to call 911, I mean, I think that week, or maybe it was 2 weeks, oh my goodness, and I've talked to UPD about this. If we don't have school resource officers, we're calling 911 all day, and they will get to us when they can get to us. I mean, it isn't like they have a squad car just sitting at the corner ready to run down to the middle school and high school immediately when we need them. I think that is just a reality, and it's not a reality that any of us want to be in. And I think we got to experience that a little bit this spring when we had some incidents and Officer Robinson wasn't there, and we had to make more 911 calls than we would imagine that we needed to. So I just wanted to share that, since it's something we talked about 3 years ago, but it has kind of been something we've been able to see. So
for some people, it won't hit them until it hits home, and it's gonna be too late at that point.
All right, anybody else? All right, I guess I'm gonna make a really quick statement. I have a couple questions. I don't expect to be answered tonight. This is given the hour, and I don't think you have answers for these 2 questions. So when this comes back to us, maybe this is like homework. I'm a little hesitant to have a 3-year agreement without some sort of hard data, some measurables. I mean, I understand that so much of this can't be quantified. Relationship can't be quantified. So a lot of these stories, don't lead to quantifiable data. But there still should be some raw metrics that we could take along the way to have some idea that things are moving in the right direction. So think on what data we could collect over 3 years to help us, verify that this is going in the right direction. The second piece is, I know that in community policing, there's some communities that have, citizen review boards or such things with police departments. Could we partner with our PTSAs in our building, just even, briefly, a couple times a year possibly, to allow our PTSAs and our police department, our SROs, to kind of review the status of things in the buildings and just to even have an opportunity to talk in those forums. So no response, but when this comes back to us, I'd be interested to hear what you have to say. Anybody else? Okay. Thank you all for your patience and your time tonight.
So Paul, our goal was not to have another 3-hour discussion. So our goal is to bring back the agreement as a agenda item for action at the next meeting, hopefully.
There's still going to be lots of discussion, though.
Yep. Just
There won't be a big presentation. I understand.
Yep. Yes, you may go.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right, and I want to.
Yeah.
All right. So I want to. All right. Yeah. Okay. I have to take a moment here. It's 10:30. We've had these poor DL people waiting here for 3 hours on us. How long is this presentation going to take?
It's not the full presentation, and I think I thought we made that pretty clear. Evidently, we didn't do a good job of that. That tonight we're just we're not even making a recommendation this evening. Our goal was not even to share any data. We have one more meeting with the committee next week. So all the data and survey data was going to be shared at our next meeting on the 17th. So this presentation was more so just kind of bringing the public up to some of the models that we've looked at, some of the priority needs. So Lupe, would you say 20 minutes? But it all would depend on questions from the board. I think our part is not as long.
All right.
When you bring that data to the community in 2 weeks, when does the vote by the board take place?
So it's a committee recommendation. So it is, and we can talk about that. That's in one of the slides.
Okay.
So I'd say 20 minutes.
All right. So
Joe?
with the board's permission, we can continue then. All right. Otherwise, we have to defer this to a future meeting. So, all right.
And I'll just say this: when we initially planned the agenda, we knew the school resource officer conversation was going to have a lot more public, and that is why that presentation was first, because we knew we had a lot of participation from the public. We didn't expect that for this part of the part one that we would have so many people here. So I just wanted to say that out loud. That wasn't our intent to make people wait for 3 hours. So.
Right. Sorry. Thank you.
Yep. Okay. So I'm starting off, and then Lupe is going to do the majority of our conversation. So again, I just want to reiterate, this is a part one. Our intent tonight was not to present all the data. We still have further discussions to have at the committee level. All of that information will be shared at our next meeting. So I did want to recognize the committee. As was mentioned earlier, we did have a couple of additional parents who maybe joined one meeting, and we had one parent from Dr. Williams who was supposed to be part of the committee and never attended any meetings, which unfortunately, that is the reality of working committees. We invite parents, we select parents, and then when you meet twice a month for 2 or 3 hours, for 4 months in a row, it is a huge time commitment, and unfortunately, we lose parents in the process. So these are the parents who have, a couple of them are here tonight, and we have some other DL/staff members who are also part of the committee, and then we have several district staff who play a wide variety of roles. There's teachers there on that left side. There are parent liaisons there. We have UEA reps there. So I know there was a comment that the majority of these people are administrators, but technically most of them are teachers. So I want to thank the committee. We thanked them last week for all of the time, the homework they've had to do. So there has been a lot of time and effort put into the conversations thus far. So when we met with the board back in November, I believe, or December, when we initially talked about some of the issues that needed to be addressed, That was the focus of the committee work. This was not intended to be a full program evaluation. There's no way to do something like that in 4 months, so we knew that wasn't going to be our charge. Our goal is to continue these conversations for the 22-23 school year. We spent the year completing the several rubrics and collecting data. That last bullet point, we utilized the guiding principles of dual language as our way to begin to evaluate the program and look at some of the areas that we're doing well and look at some of the areas that we need to improve across those 7 strands of dual language. And then that, all of that data that we've collected from the committee will then inform a lot of the conversations that we have next year around reviewing student achievement data, curriculum, instruction, teaching methods. All of those things are part of the strands. So that'll be a part of the continued work to come for the next school year. But the other bullets really do reflect what our needs were. I mean, right now, our needs are space. We need teachers because we are filling positions with long-term subs. We've run out of room at both Dr. Williams and at Leal, and we have a large group of kindergarten students coming into our spaces, and we have no space for them to go. So recruitment, retention, a lot of conversations have happened at the committee level around collaboration. Our dual language teachers don't get the same opportunities to collaborate across the 2 elementary buildings or across grade levels that their non-DL teaching peers have. There's some scheduling issues at UMS with the large 6th grade class entering that needed to be addressed. And then at the high school, there have been a lot of conversations about the current dual language classes, 10th grade. They spent a year of remote learning and just trying to embed that responsive school community model at UHS. We're at the very beginning, and there's a lot of growth and work that needs to be done there. So the high school team and the committee have spent a lot of time talking about that. And I already referenced our increased elementary program enrollment and the large number of incoming multilingual, emergent bilingual kindergartners. And Lupe is going to take the next few slides.
Okay, so as you have had this ahead of time, I will not read all of these slides to you, but I will just highlight some points. So as Dr. Ivory Tatum had mentioned, this year we did have 7 long-term subs in our program, which they were great. They've all done an amazing job, but as you know, having a sub is not an even replacement as having a certified teacher. So one way to rectify that is we already are in the process of hiring and offering positions to 5 visiting international teachers from Spain for next year that will primarily be at the secondary level. HR, Angie, and her team have been working to really explore this H-1B visa process, and we have 1 teacher that we are working with right now in that process for next year. Another big component is retaining our current teachers. Earlier, someone had mentioned that, staff have lots of options right now. Well, that's even bigger for teachers in specialized areas like special ed and bilingual and ESL. So we really want to keep our teachers. Our teachers are amazing, and we need to start exploring ways to keep them here. One thing that I just want to make the board aware of is that using some American Rescue Plan money is we did recently release information about a grant called the Bilingual Pathway Teacher Grant. So I'm hopeful, I have applied, I'm hopeful that we will be awarded some funds because that will help us to then pay tuition for our teachers that are currently on provisional licenses, as well as add ESL bilingual endorsements to current staff that are already on their PELs. So this is really a great thing for Illinois, so I'm just hopeful that we're awarded that. As Dr. Ivory Tatum mentioned, at the elementary level, the big challenge, in addition to space, specifically from the teacher's perspective, has been the amount of collaboration or lack thereof and professional development that's really targeted. So as we all know, teachers are constant learners and they need to constantly perfect their craft. And that's been really hard to do with a dual language team when they have not had the opportunities to meet and collaborate together without sacrificing something in their building. So for example, I've been able this semester to pull the elementary team once a month, but in exchange for that, they're having to give up what the rest of their building is meeting on in the building and having to catch up. And that has made it very challenging. So for those of you that are familiar with the purpose of collaboration, it's not just time for teachers to sit and chat and catch up. It really is time for them to be productive, to plan together, to problem solve together, and to really focus on how to make improvements on the units and lessons that they've been doing. And when you miss that and you're a single teacher in a building, that's been very, very challenging for them to not have someone to bounce ideas off of. So they came up with some great ideas on how they could possibly make this work for next year. As whatever decision is made will be a planning year next year for them to get some time to collaborate, as well as the principals agreeing to some Monday meeting time as well.
So I have the next slide specific to middle school. As part of the committee, I was helping facilitate the middle school subsection of the committee. Some of the main components that are specific to middle school relates to the growing number of students going into 6th grade and next year into 6th and 7th grade. The numbers are almost doubling over the next couple years, as well as therefore that when you get into the secondary level, you have to have both the ESL bilingual endorsement on top of the secondary content area degree or PEL, professional educator license, which makes recruitment and retention challenging at the secondary level, but also once you are in those positions, the typical teacher who teaches a science class at the middle school level teaches 1 grade level of science curriculum to 4 sections plus an intervention class, whereas historically our dual language teachers or ESL bilingual teachers a long time ago have had to teach multiple grade levels, multiple preps, multiple sections, which some teachers do that in different specialized areas, but in those core subjects of science, social studies, math, language arts, we're really trying to move in the direction of having our dual language teachers have an equivalent type of schedule and preps, number of preps, as a monolingual teacher does for monolingual programs and monolingual classrooms. And so that's our biggest area of need at the middle school level right now, is that master schedule, the collaboration time, the number of preps, and what their daily schedule looks like at the secondary level. This is high school too, but very specific to middle school for the immediate future, as well as the differentiated support for newcomers. And so really trying to provide programmatic shifts to allow for intentional classes for recent arrival immigrant youth, as well as students that just have interrupted formal schooling patterns historically. And so we have our students that have gone through our program. We have students who have been in other programs that are moving in, but we also have students that are moving in at the 6th grade, 7th grade, 8th grade, high school level that haven't been in school for a couple years. They're recently arriving from Latin America, Central America, and we really want to provide a more intentional approach to supporting them within the context of dual language. And so those are 2 big areas for us at the middle school level moving forward.
Hello, and I have the slide for the high school as we met as a high school team. And the goal for the high school is to develop a more culturally responsive and inclusive dual language program. And so multiple ways we can do that, but first of all is having signage throughout the building. So whether it's expectations or opportunities that are available in multiple languages. And in particular, one area that we've noticed, and this also impacts social emotional learning too, but is that we have signage to identify staff for support and to make sure that's available in multiple languages throughout the building. That's really important. And increasing linguistic accessibility to all students and family support. So making sure that, for example, our course guidebook is available in multiple languages as well. So it shouldn't be that something has to be interpreted for students, but they can also have those discussions when they go home with their families and it's accessible. and seeking student input to ensure there's full opportunities given to access courses and extracurricular activities. And again, those individual conversations are really important to make sure that we don't have any barriers for our students. Increasing support for families with resources within the district and community, again in multiple languages, to make sure that our families know what resources are accessible within the walls of Urbana High School and within the community. Increased family-school collaboration opportunities, having more events. All teachers in the multilingual department will meet on Wednesdays during course team time, at least 2 times per month. This is something that we would have the opportunity to do now because we have, with the master schedule, departments will have common planning time as part of the master schedule. So what would have normally been department planning time and collaboration, we would be able to have available time on Wednesdays now with the new master schedule. And provide routine PDs, training, and conferences for staff about dual language programming, as well as how to best support multilingual learners in their classrooms. And refining freshman orientation to making sure that it's more inclusive for our DL and ESL students, and making sure, for example, that presentations are inclusive for our students in their language.
So just very quickly to talk about the increased enrollment at the elementary level and why this is such a critical conversation at the elementary level. So these numbers are fairly recent. So currently we know that we have 39 KH students that are coming and that have the opportunity to participate in dual language because they are emergent bilinguals and their Spanish is one of their dominant languages. This obviously will impact the transfer into one additional K classroom being added to Dr. Williams, and also the need to maintain 2 K classrooms at Leal, which, as Dr. Arvey Tatum had already mentioned, there is already a capacity and space issue at both schools. As well as applicants so far, as you can see, there are quite a few applicants from Leal, as well as petitioners and Dr. Williams. Those applications close on Friday, so they're still kind of rolling in. So another piece to keep in mind is that we continue to have more newcomer students, as Dr. Wiemel has represented or has mentioned, and many of our newcomer students are coming from Central America, South America, speaking indigenous languages where Spanish is their second, sometimes third language. So there's a different type of support that's needed there, and that's another big component to when you look at overall enrollment. Those are students that are also added. This year alone, we added over 25 new students to our program. So I'm expecting that to continue, as well as typically from now until after centralized registration, we typically get anywhere from 5 to 10 emergent bilingual Spanish-speaking kindergartners that were not in preschools or daycares that we don't know about. So that's just a typical year regarding enrollment. Another focus with the group was looking at the different program models. So the group, the committee really looked at primarily these 3 different types of models. We also included feedback. So we included focus groups with parents in the dual language program, as well as the teachers conducted focus groups with their own students during morning meeting, kindergarten through 5th grade. We also sent out surveys to all dual language parents, all dual language students, as well as all teachers and staff at Leal and at Dr. Williams School, and that included staff and teachers that were not directly affiliated with the dual language program, as well as all dual language staff at the middle school and high school. As we had mentioned earlier, surveys are challenging for a lot of our families for a variety of different reasons. So our Latino family liaisons took it upon themselves and suggested that they would do one-on-one meetings and focus groups with parents, and they actually were able to get to meet with over 50 different families and collect a lot of information, which we will present at our next meeting. So just very briefly, this is one of the models that we discussed.
So I won't spend hardly any time on that because we've already said this isn't a realistic option, the K6 model, the K7 model, but we brought it to the committee to discuss. A lot of the concerns, more cons than pros. The pros, why we're even just considering it, was the longer amount of time to be at the elementary setting in a dual language school had some pros and some advantages to think about in terms of linguistic development within that same space at the elementary level. But facilities and enrollment and those sorts of things, there are a lot of cons to that, as well as missing out on their first or second year of the middle school experience, whereas everyone else in Urbana is starting middle school in 6th grade. There were too many other issues to explore. So we took that K6, K7 model off the table pretty early in our committee work, but it was part of our initial conversation.
And with that, this was another model that the committee had discussed that was taken off the table fairly early, looking at grade level centers. So this was considering putting all kindergarten through 2nd grade classrooms at both Leal and Dr. Williams at one of the buildings, and all 3rd through 5th grade classrooms from Leal and Dr. Williams at another building. So while there were some pros regarding, collaboration, whether, time for, having developmentally appropriate practices within a building, as well, there were some challenges. One that, stood out pretty quickly was the difficulties if I'm a parent and I have children at 2 different buildings. How does that work with transportation? How does that work with drop-off? How am I involved in 2 buildings when, myself as a parent, it's hard to be involved in 1 building. So, as well, as how does that affect bus times, and if kids are just getting settled in when they're 3rd graders and then having to transition. So you can see the list, as just like with the K6, K7 model, this is one that the team just felt like wasn't, there was no value in continuing that discussion. The largest discussion that the team had was looking at the pros and cons between the strand model, which we already have, as well as the whole school model. And there are absolutely some pros to what we're doing right now. We've been doing it for 10 years. We know how to manage this strand model. The schools have pretty established communities at their school. For the most part, students are going to a school that is close to them, but I think the piece that needs to be mentioned here is that for most of our emergent bilingual families, they're not. They are bused. Regardless which school they are at, they are bused. So I do think it's important to mention that. As well as family members that have siblings that are not in dual language, the family's still in the same school, so that was a pro. As well as, then all of a building gets a diverse experience, as well as collaboration opportunities are there for between DL and non-DL. Looking at some of the cons with the strand model, we have already talked about space. Looking at the way resources and staff are split between multiple buildings is very challenging. For those of you that are not aware, we have 1 bilingual school psychologist, and she is stretched very thin between many buildings across the district. As well as having only 1 strand of a class in a building can affect both the monolingual side and the dual language side. For example, at Leal, there are 2 dual language classes and only 1 monolingual class, which makes that monolingual class very large. The same happens with dual language. Our 2nd grade dual language class at Dr. Williams is at capacity, but our classes at Leal are quite small. So that is another con as far as balancing those classes. The teachers felt really strongly that it was really hard to balance a building and have everything be geared towards a monolingual and a dual language program. When principals present professional development, when they have initiatives, it's very focused on the dominant, which in both of these buildings is the English dominant environment. As well as just looking at the rest of these, looking at mentor matches. So we have a great mentoring program in this district, but it's really hard to mentor match veteran dual language teachers with novice teachers if all of your veterans are at another site. Typically, professional development doesn't like to mentor match people from two different buildings because it really hinders that experience and loses some of that contact time with a mentor. Again, we've talked about resources being a really challenge, the different inequities across the different buildings, as well as that feeling of a school within a school. And I know that that's one of the reasons why Ms. Norton had mentioned, you know, focusing on creating a more culturally responsive UHS. We need to do that in all of our buildings with a strand model, you know, having that feeling of, well, you're the dual language kids and you're the not dual language kids. And when I started in this district, the language around the families that were emergent bilinguals was very hard to hear. As a first-year teacher, I'll be very honest, so I'm really hoping that we're evolving past that school within a school feeling, and those are your kids and these are my kids, because they're all our kids, right? As well as, you know, the middle school teachers have commented on when kids come from two different sites and the two teachers aren't necessarily matching their curriculum or doing things similarly, it creates some time at the middle school where they really have to adjust and adapt and catch the kids up at different levels. So looking at the whole school model, we talked about some pros as well as some cons. You know, as I had mentioned, support staff might have easier caseloads because they're all in one place, all the kids are in one place. There would be an opportunity for students and families to have more pride in their program, more language opportunities to practice outside of the classroom. So for anyone that has ever walked into a whole school dual language school, it is a feeling of everyone in there speaks Spanish, everyone in there welcomes me, everyone, you know, can connect with me in one way or another. As well as you can then manage your resources so that they're very specific to the program. So it would make sure that there are more shared resources between teachers, which is very important. As well as, again, evening out that class size. So then that second grade group that I'm talking about, instead of having 26 over here and 14 over here, you can actually blend those classes together and create a more balanced environment. As well, we all know sometimes each year grade level of teachers might want to shift kids around and try a different teacher or try a different dynamic of kids. When you only have one strand of a program, you can't do that. They're together K through 5. And that was another thing that was brought up by the teachers. I really do feel that teacher retention would be improved. Right now, the workload, especially on those singletons that are by themselves and not having someone to collaborate with, is very hard. Having teachers be able to support each other, bounce ideas off each other, and share the workload, I think is very critical, especially right now, because we all know that our teachers are overwhelmed and they are tired. As well as, you know, really increasing those cultural celebrations as well in the schools. Sorry, the teachers. Just an FYI, all of these information was from the committee, but also the dual language teachers also did pros and cons as well. So again, having that mentoring opportunity. Another piece that came up quite often was looking at building leadership and having, when you only have one building, you wouldn't need as many bilingual administrators across multiple buildings. As well as, let's see here, elevating Spanish. So frequently what that means is that, you know, when you walk into a predominantly monolingual building, English is kind of the default language. Whereas in this case, you would really have the opportunity to elevate Spanish and really make that possibly the default language as well. Encouraging students to use that Spanish across different environments, such as the lunchroom, etc., and really making sure that you're tailoring professional development. So every staff meeting, every school improvement meeting, everything that's done is really targeted towards what is best for a dual language program.
looking at the cons, because everything has cons, would be that non-dual language and staff would be relocated. In order to make room for one school, unless we're talking about building a brand new school, obviously that would mean some shifting. Looking at current collaboration and work, so right now teachers that have been working with their monolingual grade level peers have those relationships, and they've had them for a long time, so that would potentially be harmed for them and for students as well. That neighborhood experience would be lost. We recognize that. Any siblings of dual language students that are not in dual language would be at a different school. There would be a potential increased need for transportation, as well as we have been getting feedback that there would be an appearance of dual language being segregated or isolated, as well as risking decreasing that loss of that cross-cultural understanding from some of the other buildings who are housing dual language programs wouldn't necessarily have that anymore. As well as that concern that dual language would be seen as somewhat of an other program, possibly losing any of their existing prestige.
So to close us out, as Lupe has already shared, a lot of some of the committee work was done as a large group, but we did spend a lot of time addressing this part one conversation around the needs of elementary, middle school, and high school. The next conversation that comes forward on the 17th will be very much just elementary focused. And as Lupe shared, the models that were considered not viable have now been put to the side, and the last model that we're really looking at is what we've kind of heard tonight, is the whole school versus strand model, is what the continued conversation will be on the 17th. Future committee work, I've already kind of talked about some of these things. So we made a decision very early on that we did not have enough time to do anything for next year, no matter what the recommendation might be. We know there's some really high level enrollment and space things that we have to address no matter what. But these are other things that we would continue to talk about next year. So financial impact, learning outcomes. As I mentioned before, we took all those rubrics, so we have a lot of information that we've gathered from the committee that now we can take and put into practice in terms of building a program for our newcomers and really looking at how we're delivering curriculum and exploring some of those things in more of a program evaluation model, and really looking at our current model, and is our current model working for us? Is our current structure meeting the needs of the students K-10 and next year K-11. So that is 22-23 work, and that is basically it. So we'll be coming back. This was, again, the beginning part of our conversations. Our last few committee meetings have very much focused on what we're going to do at the elementary level, and that's what we're going to bring back to the board on the 17th.
All right, board members, questions?
I have one quick one. Is the H-1B visa, can we use that anywhere in the world, or is it, it's just Spain, or?
Yeah, so right now, our attorneys, like our attorney affiliate with Robinson Schwartz in Chicago sent me a document today, and it's been more complicated than I thought, but we are in a good state. The document the paperwork that we submitted was 178 pages, and a lot of ongoing conversations, and the teacher that we're working with is fantastic and been able to provide documents upon request pretty immediately. And so this has been a great experience, like a great pilot, which we had board support and UEA support. And so right now we had to submit stuff to Homeland Security, and then we'll see what happens. And if we get it, if they approve, we get this teacher to start in the dual language program in the fall. If they don't, we're out the money, and it is what it is. And so the attorney thinks that our paperwork and that our request is solid, so it should work, and that the total cost to the district is probably going to be about $8,000 or $9,000 with application fees. for all of that, attorney's fees for the paperwork, there's just lots of different things to consider. But we wanted to see what the process was like, to see if this would be something that we could enter in. And it's really nice to be able to have a teacher that is beloved in the community, and then also that was at the school, and that we're not necessarily taking a chance on, like, an unknown, right? To invest this amount of money on one teacher when we know that she's fabulous, when we don't know about somebody else, it's kind of a risk. But for this, it's not a risk. So it's been good so far.
Okay. I just asked because I know that it would be wonderful if we could get some native speakers who have, you know, Spanish and also native languages from, you know, Central America and stuff, since I know that we have families who, like on the French side, there's a lot of Congolese families who say French isn't their first language. It's Lingala, thank you, I'm so tired. And so even more so with the Spanish language. If it works, I'm delighted.
Yeah, sorry, I guess that was your ultimate question. I'm just tired, as I'm sure all of you are. And so, yeah, this can work for anyone. It's just that we have to decide whether or not we can afford it.
Well,
you
I'm
know?
glad you looked into it.
Yeah, no, I mean, it was,
all the options. Yeah.
we were told some information a few years ago that was not necessarily accurate. So it was great to try it.
Any other questions, comments?
Yeah, I mean, I think we, about like 7 hours ago, heard some really fabulous questions from many of our parents and community members regarding the process that should be looked at again and answered and really taken seriously. I do think it's really important. I don't quite understand why we weren't asking the monolingual families at the same time. I still think that seems to be an elusive kind of misstep, that everyone in these schools is going to be impacted in some way. So we're trying to think about like the most gain with the least amount of impact, but we completely didn't speak to a huge group of the population.
Just one real quick response
Yeah.
to that is the purpose of the committee was to look at best options for program improvements for dual language specific families and students. So while I hear your and the questions and concerns about non-dual language students and families is valid, but the purpose of the committee was looking at programmatic changes and improvements for dual language specifically. Just to respond to that.
Sure, I
piece
guess
there.
I just think like throughout the sussing out of how the models that you looked at and how that played out, it seems like it would have been like, oh, we're really actually like, this is now encroaching on redistricting in some capacity. And when it's in that realm, it seems to me that there would have been like all right, we really need to like engage in a different way and hear in a different way, and making sure that folks that are going to be impacted by this have that same opportunity to share their opinions.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
This is not a public forum, I'm sorry.
You can email me. Or anybody.
So anyone else? I want to get some clarification out real quick. I guess what's the timetable with regards to the committee and whatever board decisions need to be made?
So, yes, so, at our next meeting, I think I'm reluctant to say that I feel like hopefully we're going to have a recommendation for our next meeting. We have one more meeting, but we, again, have been having a lot of discussions. So at our May 17th meeting, we hope to bring back a recommendation. And at that point, the next school year would be a planning year. So whatever recommendation is brought forward, if we do, if the committee does recommend a whole school model, then there would be a whole school year to plan for all of those things that were listed on the pros and cons. If we continue with the strand model, there's some significant things that have to be addressed immediately that can't wait for a long school year conversation. So.
Okay.
And I guess one other consideration and question for the committee would also just be, I don't hear a lot about like the after school program as well. So I guess making sure that that's also part of the conversation as far as how that impacts the strand model or the one school model.
That's a great point. I mean, I guess one other factor is that you will have 8 more classrooms coming online for that school year as well, the 23-24 school year with Thomas Paine, that might factor into planning at the elementary level, space needs. So, all right, thank you for any further questions? All right, thank you so much for hanging out tonight.
Thank you.
All right, our last administrative report is Insurance Committee recommendation. Angie.
And actually, I'm wondering if Angie could email you guys. I mean, this doesn't really require a board vote. It was more informational. So I don't know, what are your?
That's quick. Let's have it.
I can also read it real quick. I've got it
Quick?
typed
Go
up.
for it.
Yep. Okay. Somebody time me. I'm kind of curious. Also, this is a plug to start at 6 or 6:30 in the future, like next year. Okay.
I
So
agree.
the collective bargaining agreement number 20.02 discusses the fringe benefit of insurance offered to district employees. This school year, the contract with Blue Cross Blue Shield of Illinois expires August 31st, 2022. With the current insurance costs to the district and staff. After decades of being insured with Health Alliance, Urbana has switched to Blue Cross Blue Shield of Illinois because of the guaranteed 2-year rates, which were substantially lower than Health Alliance 2 years ago. Per 20.02 of the CBA, a district insurance committee was formed, made up of UEA members, non-UEA members, and district administrators. The committee has been actively meeting this semester. The Gallagher Insurance Company and broker accepted bids for health insurance for Urbana School District moving into the new school year. Last week, we received the last and best offer from the 2 health insurance finalists, Health Alliance and Blue Cross Blue Shield. Almost all district insurance committee members recommended entering a new contract with Health Alliance starting in September of 2022. Since the costs to the district were much closer than 2 years ago, a survey was sent out to all staff to gain feedback as to whether staff had a preference for Health Alliance or Blue Cross Blue Shield. 241 staff members completed the optional survey, which closed yesterday morning. So this is 241 staff members out of about 1,000. 56% of the staff who responded prefer Health Alliance, and 44% of the staff prefer Blue Cross Blue Shield. Since the majority of the staff prefer Health Alliance along with matching the insurance committee's recommendation, we are planning to move the contract back to Health Alliance for the 22-23 school year. Due to the large monetary increases to both the district and staff, which is approximately $2 million, we will be holding various informational sessions with Health Alliance so that staff members are aware of various things they can do to help prevent the insurance rates from increasing in future years. Just for example, going to the emergency room instead of convenient care when possible, because that has been happening. Per the CBA, the district contribution to insurance for the 22-23 school year is 88% of the single option plan or 88% of the highest single plan of a dual multiple plan option. Other health insurance costs which exceed 88% shall be paid by the employee. As always, staff have the option to opt out of district offered insurance if they have insurance elsewhere and then are eligible to receive the employee benefit allowance of $2,750. Per the CBA, the insurance company will provide the board with plan recommendations, and the recommendation will not be unreasonably rejected. The district administration finds Health Alliance to be a reasonable recommendation and preferred by the majority of the district insurance committee and staff who participated in the survey. The reason why this was important to do tonight is so that we could do open enrollment before school lets out and to be able to catch staff members who don't check email over the summer.
All right, thank
Done.
you. Any questions? All right, thank you, Angie.
You were at 3 minutes even, by the
All
way.
right, so going on to our action items, or individual, 11.1, we have a set of administrative personnel items that were in our packet. Is there a motion to approve these?
So moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, roll call vote, please.
Member Hall?
Yes.
Member Orr?
Yes.
Member Ogalski?
Yes.
Member Carter votes yes. Vice President Exum?
Yes.
And President Pulaski?
Yes, 11.2 is a resolution authorizing and directing the public sale of a certain property in accordance with Illinois law. Is Katie on to discuss? She hung
I don't
up.
have anything to add. I just am here in case you had questions. I prepared the resolution and the notice of sale per our previous meeting, and it is there for your approval. The newspaper ad is set to run for the next 3 consecutive Fridays, assuming approval this evening. So that's up to y'all. And if you have any questions, I'm here.
So is there a motion to approve the sale of this building for $950,000 minimum offer?
I move for approval.
Is there a second?
Second.
Roll call, please. Sorry, is there any discussion? Roll call, please.
Member Hall?
Yes.
Member Orr?
Yes.
Member Ogalski?
Yes.
Member Carter votes yes. Vice President Exum?
Yes.
And President Pulaski?
Yes, last up is our organization of the board. So our officer terms expired, and we are voting on officers again to serve out the remainder of this election cycle, which is 1 year. We can do this one of two ways. We can nominate a slate of people all at once with one vote, or we can go office by office, whatever the board would prefer. I guess someone can just make a motion one way or the other, and we'll just go with that.
I move, unless people object, to just having a slate, one simple slate of all positions.
So
Is
to clarify, is that to
nominate,
is the same slate again?
Yes, sorry. I move to nominate the same slate again unless somebody wants to,
Is there a second? All right, moved and seconded. Is there discussion?
That assumes everybody who's on there is willing.
Yes,
Yeah.
I'm willing.
Yes.
Okay. All right. All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay, great. There is no call for any future special or executive meetings. Superintendent's report.
And in the interest of time, I'll forego most of it, but I have to. John, can you, I forgot the clicker. So Teacher Appreciation Week, bike and bike to school, not walk, bike and roll to school week is tomorrow, but I wanted to, there it is. Michael is gone, but when you see Michael, please congratulate him. He, board member Exum mentioned last meeting about him getting through our local competition for the Oratorical CU Optimist Club, and he represented CU at the regional level and placed third place and won a $1,000 scholarship. So I know he's not here, but when you see him, please recognize him and congratulate him for his efforts. And the rest, we will just let people read at your leisure.
Big deal for a freshman.
Yes.
It
He
is.
competed against seniors that have been doing this 4 years and got third place. So super proud of him for even taking the initiative and doing that. It was great.
One thing I do want to, because this is a timeline deadline, if you are interested in recognizing any unsung heroes from the district, the deadline is Friday. So this could be a teaching assistant, a lunchroom supervisor, a principal, an AP, a teacher, literally anybody. So the nomination form will be linked in the board update that Catherine sends out tomorrow. So, all right.
All right. Any board reports?
I have one. On Thursday, the Illini Division dinner meeting is at 6 o'clock in Mattoon. So if anybody's interested in going, let Lori Johnson know. It's actually going to be, they're going to be voting, I believe. Is that correct, Tori? On different offices in our division. So.
Great. Any other board reports?
Not a board report, but just wanted to mention for the next 40 minutes, wishing Dr. Ivory Tatum a very happy birthday on behalf of the administration.
Happy birthday, Jennifer.
Late night with us, unfortunately.
All right. Is there a motion to adjourn?
Hey,
So moved.
thank you.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Thank
Thanks.
you for our UPT.
Oh, sorry.
Late night.
So thank you, Anna Seaman, for hanging out so long for us tonight and getting us on YouTube
Thank you.
at this point.